Hello, everybody. It's August 28th. Welcome to the Hastings-on-Hudson Board of Education meeting. I apologize that we're starting late, and we will absolutely use our best efforts to start on time as we move forward. We just concluded an executive session, and now the first item that we have is a hearing on our district-wide safety plan. I believe this is something that's required of us by law. If anybody has a comment to make for this public hearing, we invite you to come up to the podium and state your comment. Is there anybody here who cares to make a comment on the safety plan? Okay, and Maureen pointed out if anybody has reviewed it online, there were a few small changes. I think you said one was a gentleman's name and then there was some spelling. Yes. So, okay, so I think we're going to move on, and now we're going to take something out of order.
Yes,
is that right?
We're going to do a personnel.
Can we do the announcements first and then do that?
I'm sorry.
Okay, never mind.
Oh, may I have a motion to open the meeting?
Second. Moved. Lisa moved.
And do we have a second? Can I have a second?
Returning to this meeting.
Do we want to do the appointment or announcement first?
Sorry, Jody, what were you saying?
I guess I like it when we open the meeting and we do whatever the announcements are, and then if we want to move out of order. I know we've done it both ways, but I think there's something about the opening and the welcoming and talking a little bit about the district before we, and then.
And so you mean for me to be
Yeah, for you.
Hi, everyone. Great. Good times. Hi. My name is Tony, and I enjoy long walks. And no, thank you, Jody. All kidding aside.
So we're all a work in progress.
It has been a really busy month, actually. So we had a meeting August 1st, which was about 4 weeks ago, and in that time, we have done a lot of work at the district level. One of our primary focal points has been staffing, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in a couple of minutes as we appoint a few new staff members. But we have worked on everything from finding our new athletic director, Jesse Merchant, who is here in the audience with us tonight, who has done a really tremendous job already. And I can speak to the fact that we've also launched unofficially the fall athletic season as our kids have gotten engaged in practice. I keep calling it rehearsal. I saw them. I went out to see. I went out to see field hockey, and I was like, "How's rehearsal going?" And they're like, "What?" I'm on it. I'm working on it. But practice is going well, and our kids are really actively engaged. Our football team, our soccer teams, our field hockey teams, our team. So Jesse has done a great job coordinating those efforts and really kind of reflecting on processes. And we're going to talk a little bit later. We're going to revisit an issue related to one of our fields based on the work that Jesse has done with his coaches and some stuff that we have unpacked together. So thank you, Jesse, for that work. Additionally, in terms of other staffing, we have been in the process of looking for a speech and language pathologist and an assistant director for special education, which were points that we talked about at our last meeting when we did an overview of the audit. Laura Sullivan and I did that, and Laura is here as well. And Laura and I have spent a lot of time together this summer and really spent time kind of prioritizing our needs, but then also diving into this staffing piece, because those pieces are critical to kind of doing the work that we need to be doing. Additionally, I've had the opportunity to engage in a bunch of entry interviews, so I've had a chance to meet with a bunch of our teachers. I had developed a schedule for 2 days that were just 2 random dates in August that were blocked off in my calendar to meet with teachers in like 40-minute slots. And I didn't know if anyone would really sign up for it, because who wants to come hang out with me in the middle of the summer when you could be somewhere else? And both days happened to be beautiful weather, I should note. And we had to squeeze people in, and people have emailed me separately to ask if we can continue these conversations that I sort of labeled Talking to Tony. And so we've had some really great conversations, and I've developed some great insight based on what our teachers have shared with us. I've also had a chance to meet with various board members and staff members. So the entry interviews as part of my entry plan have been a really great experience thus far. And then there's also all the physical work that's been happening under the direction of Joe Martorano, our director of facilities. And we just took a facilities tour before the meeting began. So we started up at Hillside, and we saw work from everything from the mulch that went down in the playground to lockers that were put into the kindergarten classrooms. So our kindergartners have lockers, which is pretty cool. We're getting them like high school ready from day one. And but we put them there because they were all to protect from lice. And they were lockers that were here in the middle school, but when we replaced them, they fit perfectly in little nooks in the kindergarten classroom. So we took a tour through there. We saw there was a lot of painting that went down, and a lot of all the work that we saw was done by our men, which is pretty unique. A lot of other districts contract out, and there were like rooms that were redesigned, walls put up, walls taken down, to really create ideal spaces for our teachers and our kids. So we're excited about that work. And then we went over to the Burke Field and we saw the fields, which are, we're not really supposed to be playing on them yet, but we are. We're like kind of breaking the rules a little bit by practicing on them. But Jesse is also being mindful of day on, day off kind of thing to make sure the grass and the whatever sod takes hold there. And then we ended up back here in the middle school, high school complex and saw a bunch of different projects in this building as well. So it's been a really busy summer. I kiddingly go home and tell my partner that I haven't eaten in 4 days. Not that you would know from the way I look, but the days just kind of zip through. But it's been great, and we're really excited for this week to finally be here. And we have our opening day on Thursday with our teachers, and they're here Thursday and Friday. And then our kids come on Tuesday, which is I'm super excited about. And we have new staff orientation on Wednesday as well for all our new staff members. So how's that? Is that okay?
Great.
Is that too much? You should time me because I can go on and on. So.
I do think a
Would you
special
just read
thanks
some
to
of
the
these,
buildings and grounds people for all the, having seen all the work that was done is really, both in quantity and quality, is incredibly impressive. I think people will get to see some of it, but, well, for me especially, all the work in the gyms really stands out, but the cafeteria, it's just...
Agreed.
And even little things like the painting in the bathrooms. I mean, it's really very striking what they've done.
I thank you for saying that, Jody. I mean, we're talking about detail like the trim around the windows, and not in this room. Don't look at this room. This is the last priority, but this is going to happen too. But even in the lunchroom, there's like Carlos just pointed out that there were like 8 different colors used in the lunch. 6 different colors.
No, six
Gray.
coats of paint.
No, 6 colors.
6 different
Oh, I thought he
colors.
said
It was
6
big-
coats
it was-
of paint.
And
Big
so,
deal. Not his.
Oh, and another nice thing is a lot of the fluorescent lighting is gone, and
Oh,
it's
it's
like
all
an
new
LED type
yeah.
lighting. I know. It still does have that
Not
white
here.
look, but it's but it's better than this, right? It's-
so again, not in this room. We're going to get here eventually.
Cheaper.
But they've done an incredible
Yeah,
job.
They have. And they all
And they take
internally.
such pride in it. I think that's the other thing. It's so
Yeah.
really...
Thank you for sharing. So, so that's my update, and if we could maybe reorder and do
Sure.
appointments, that would be great.
Yep.
So,
Okay, so we're going to skip to personnel and pull one appointment out because, well, actually, I think pull both.
2.
Because
We're
we
gonna
have
pull 2.
our appointees in the room. So,
So we're going to pull
wanna
Tesfa Stewart and Michael Chappis.
okay, so do you want to say a few words about
Yes,
our
I
new,
will, sure.
appointees?
So if you turn, it's B, addendum appointments, it's under personnel. And so for everyone who's looking at the agenda. So we have a few appointments that we're making, but 2 of our appointees happen to be here tonight, so I'd love for you to see who they are and get familiar with who they are. So first and foremost, we have Mr. Tesfa Stewart, who is going to shortly be appointed as our new Assistant Director for Special Education to work closely with, we can give him a round of applause. We'll see you. So Tesfa comes to us from MLK High School of Arts and Technology in Manhattan, and he has been there for over 10 years working in different capacities, but most recently as an assistant principal, where amongst a bazillion things that he was doing, he also oversaw special education and has a lot of knowledge and understanding of everything from the development of an IEP to collaborating with families to supporting instruction to working with teacher aides, and he was very, very generous in sharing his thoughts and his ideas with us during a pretty rigorous interview process. So before that work, he was also a special education teacher, and prior to that he worked in Pleasantville schools as well. He is a new member to our leadership team also, and so that lens that he has, which is an instructional lens as an assistant principal, has added a whole other layer. He actually spent the day with us today as part of our administrative retreat, and he fit right in as if he had been there the whole time. So I would like to introduce Tesfa, and this is Tesfa Stewart right here. So welcome,
Nice to
Tesfa.
meet you.
Yeah.
Come on now.
Please do.
I'll try to be brief. I'm very excited to be here. I met with the board a little earlier, and I'm very, very eager to get some work done and, you know, bring some systems. I invited my wife, my son, my former principal, just so, you know.
Yeah. Let me.
Really nice.
I just have to say that
Yeah.
it's very rare to see a former principal come with a staff member. Now, granted, she's the former principal. She's not that upset that he's leaving as much as his current principal is. But it speaks to the impact that Tesfa has had not only on kids, but on his colleagues. So I thank you for being here as well. Sorry.
No, it's all right. And, you know, 11 years is a long time, but, you know, I maybe give 11 years here and see what we can do to make things fly and, you know, get everything on the right foot. And I'm excited. So thank you guys for having me.
We're excited to have you, Tesfa.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us.
Should we vote for him? So you want to vote to appoint him? And
Yeah.
to the next one?
Oh, okay. May I have a motion to appoint Tesfa? So moved. And a second, please?
Second.
All in favor? You're in.
Congratulations, Tesfa. Oh, Tesfa. Okay. Get ready. And to his family, yeah. And we're going to take care of your, I promise Sebastian will take care of your dad while he's here, okay? He's in good hands, and you have to make sure you come visit us at some point, all right? Sebastian is Tesfa's son, and he's going to 3rd grade. We're very lucky to have him. And his wife, of course, you know, it wouldn't be happening without you. So thank you both for sharing Tesfa with us, and we're really excited to have him on board. So congratulations again. Another appointment that we're excited to share with you is our leave replacement for physical education. As Jesse Merchant moved into the athletic director position, we needed to fill his position, and after an extensive process with that as well, I'm excited to introduce to you Michael Chappis. And Michael is coming to us from the Fordham High School for the Arts in New York City. Works with grades 6 through 12. Prior to that, Michael also worked in White Plains, and he worked at the elementary level. He also has spent time in the summer working at a camp with children with special needs, and has worked with all groups at his current school placement as well. So Michael is going to be assigned to Hillside Elementary School. And so Michael, do you mind standing for a moment so we can see you? And so Michael went through a few interviews, and the committee unanimously felt that Michael was the perfect fit for our kids at Hillside, but also for our phys ed team. Knowing that he has experience at the secondary level also makes him an asset, a potential coach, if he were to pursue that as well. And I can't tell you, I've done a bazillion interviews this summer, Michael, but your enthusiasm, your passion, and your willingness to kind of share of yourself through that process really stood out. So thank you very much for sharing. And he brought his fiance here as well, so congratulations to you too. We're going to keep him very busy, I promise, so don't worry about it. You plan the wedding of your dreams and we'll be good to go. So,
Are we all set?
yeah.
Okay, may I have a motion to appoint Michael? And a second, please? All in favor? Okay, welcome aboard.
Congratulations. Thank you for coming out.
All right, and now back to our regularly
Regular
scheduled
schedule.
program, I think.
Yes.
Okay, so next up.
Gentlemen, if you need to go, by the way, feel free to head on out. You could be here
I'd
for a
love to
while.
say it's an exciting night, but
It'll be a different kind of exciting. So.
thank you all so much, though, for coming, and thank you, family members, for joining them. Okay, the next on our section on our agenda is the public comment. So if anybody has public comment, please come up to the podium, state your name. I don't like the stating the address. I don't know that we have to. All right, right now, state your address. I'm going to check with the lawyers, but as of right now, state your address as well. Do we have any public comment? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. That's great. Okay, so next on the agenda is curriculum instruction and the special departments. And I'm going to turn it over to Tony in a moment, but Tony's going to talk to you about what our district is going to do. You know, in the lines of what we've been discussing last year, but really specifically in response to, not specifically, but just with our heightened awareness of what's going on in our country and people's feelings after what we've seen in Charlottesville. And I'll even say I was equally horrified by what went on in our backyard in Yonkers, where our state senator, Andrea Stewart Cousins, who is terrific and such a supporter of public schools, where she was the target of a racial slur by a hedge fund billionaire who is also on the board of the Success Academy Charter School, not-for-profit. So with that, I turn it over to you.
So as you may be aware, based on the communication you received from me about a week and a half ago, I had sent an email under the subject of the power of hope in education, and we have been reflecting internally on appropriate next steps. How do we address the issues of not only race and hate and bias and bigotry, but how do we inform our kids and help support their growth as they move into the world, right, and interact with people across all spectrums. So the first thing I did was I shared with our staff through an email, because they're not here quite yet, a bunch of resources that they could access around these issues. And so everything from YouTube videos to TED Talks to lesson plans to articles to infographics. There is, the second after Charlottesville started, there was actually, if you follow the hashtag Charlottesville curriculum on social media, you would at some point in the stream see a link to a Google Doc that was basically crowdsourced, resources that were crowdsourced nationally and probably internationally, of different tools that educators can use to touch on these subjects, to unpack these subjects, to involve their kids in discussions and learning. So those resources have gone out to our teachers, and they will have time to unpack those, to look at them, see what's available as the school year begins. Today we had our administrative retreat, and so we did a lot of different things throughout the day, but we spent, I would say, a solid hour and a half talking specifically about this. And so the importance of recognizing and appreciating and respecting diversity, the importance of empathy and inclusivity were things that were communicated to me throughout my interview process. So from as early back as February through now, these topics have been recurring, and our community is looking for us to be proactive and to be responsive to the needs that exist. So today we talked about that. What does that look like in Hastings? What work has been done around this work here in Hastings? So I'm still very much looking at this through the lens of an outsider, because I am so new to this. And it was important to sit with our administrative team to talk about what they're seeing as the needs. So after about 90 minutes, we came to a few things. One is all three of our principals have decided that they're going to integrate a TED Talk into their first faculty meeting. And the TED Talk is, I think, titled not colorblind, but color brilliant. Color, I can't remember the second word. I always blank on it. Say again? Brave. Color brave. Thank you, Jesse. And so we are going to show that to all our teachers as part of their opening faculty meeting. That is going to lead, that is just the beginning of the work that we need to do. So we're kind of at a crossroads a little bit, because there is some short-term work we need to do, but then there is some significant long-term work we need to do as well around these important topics. So the short-term work is just that. It's going to start with that type of work, looking at watching videos, looking at lessons, talking about possible activities that can be done. One of the things we started to unpack were the social justice standards that Teaching Tolerance puts out. It's a website that if you Google Teaching Tolerance, and not that necessarily you love the word tolerant, and they've been getting a lot of flack for that word choice, but they have developed a list of social justice standards to kind of guide instruction. We need to anchor this in something. We don't want it to be haphazard. We don't want it to be just random hits on things. We want to be thoughtful about what we're doing. We will give our teachers time to explore the resources that have been shared with them. We will give our teachers the space to potentially explore some of these resources in their classrooms based on their comfort level and based on their knowledge. We know that we have courses being rolled out in the middle school as part of their AOK classes, and they are all about racial justice. Those are going to be happening in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. All our kids are going to experience those courses. It's a 10-week quarter, so all of our kids are going to have that experience in middle school. As they move through high school, mainly in our English department, that work continues in different capacities, and there is a class that Ross Abrams teaches specifically around race, but there are other classes where topics of race and hate and bias are integrated very much into the coursework. The place that is probably the most challenging is elementary school in terms of how you unpack these things with little kids, and what does that look like on a continuum. And how do you do that work without stressing the importance of empathy and kindness and acceptance and inclusivity? Not just around race, but around gender and around, everything. The list can go on, and I'm not going to bore you with a list, but you understand that we're looking at this as broadly as we possibly can. While that work is going to be unfolding, we are also going to pursue some formalized professional development and a plan that has to unfold over the course of years, is what I would say. It's not going to be a year thing. It's not going to be a one-hit PD. We're not looking for an event. We're really looking to change the culture of our district, at least internally, to begin. And we talked about it even from the lens of, this is something that we see long-term being part of new staff orientation, right? We want our teachers from the moment they walk in the door to understand that this is important to us, this is important to our community. But it doesn't just happen with a little workshop. It happens when it's ingrained in, the culture. It's part of our fabric. And right now it's not. There has been work that has happened in pieces and in silos, I would even say, and that has led to some fragmentation across the district. Not necessarily a bad thing, because at least we're doing the work, but it's happening in a fragmented kind of way. So how can we unify it? How can we make it all kind of unfold under a specific and single umbrella, if you will? And that's where the professional development is going to come into play. We do have a subcommittee of the Diesel Committee, which is the Race Matters Committee, and they have done some work. Last year was their first year, at least as far as I understand. Last year was their first year in existence. But even that group has worked in a silo to some extent. So how do we link them into what's going on in the entire district? How do we make this a conversation about teaching and learning and not just a conversation about racial justice? And so finding that link was really the focal point, I think, and Maureen can speak to it, and Laura was with us to unpack. This is sensitive subject matter, and a lot of people have a difficult time talking about race and talking about things like privilege and talking about things like silence and understanding your role in that and your positionality in that as well. And even our administrative team, while there have been pockets of things that have happened, I would say that there was a level of discomfort even at that table at some points as we were trying to figure this out, which is a great thing. That's how you grow. You grow through these points of tension, through deliberation. That's how you evolve. You don't evolve if you don't talk about it, right? Then we can do random things, but where is it going? And so I was really proud of the fact that we were able to unpack this to some extent, map out a tentative plan, and think both long-term and short-term. I can't tell you that we have a lesson on day one that every kid is going to experience. We don't have that. Do we have resources that teachers can explore and potentially may happen? Yes. Do we know what we hope to see as the year unfolds? Yes. Are we going to continue to make this a priority as an administrative team? Yes. So that is where we're at right now as it relates to this specific subject. We are not sure who we're going to use for professional development. We've started reviewing different possibilities. We're looking at the National Seed Project, which is world-renowned, which is highly vetted, but a very specific type of professional development that involves teachers going there or staff members going there for a retreat and coming back and being the turnkey trainers. It's not really a group that you bring in to do work. And if you're interested, you can look up Peggy McIntosh. She has done a lot of the work with that group. Another group that we're looking for at is Courageous Conversations. They are a group that has been accessed nationally and do just that, unpack and facilitate courageous conversations. We are also looking at, oh gosh, this is not, crossing borders, sorry. I had a moment where I was like, Urban Outfitters. No, I just walked by Urban, sorry. Not to, so we talked about them. They have done some work here in the district, and there has been a little bit of a split about the impact and the reception on the part of our staff. The last is a gentleman whose name is Derek Gay, who went to Oberlin and happened to go to Penn Where I got my doctorate, we were not in the same cohort, so I don't have much experience with him, but he does a lot of work around diversity with independent schools. And I've had the opportunity to speak with him a little bit at a very superficial kind of level, just to kind of pick his brain. But I share all that information here because feel free to Google any of it. I think you can get some insight and know that that's kind of where we're starting as we look at what path we want to go down professionally development-wise. And they each have a different structure. And they each have pros and cons. You know, Seed is up in Wellesley College, so we would have to go there. Derek comes locally, crossing border there in New York. You know, so there are pros and cons to all of them. But right now, what I can tell you is, as an administrative team, we agreed today that this is a place we want to focus our professional development. I would say, if I'm having to guess off the top of my head, for the next 2 to 3 years, as we look at developing competencies, but also high levels of self-awareness as a staff. So that's my update, and I hope it made sense.
Does anybody from the board have any comments or questions? I actually have a few.
Please go ahead.
Just to put, I was taking notes. First, I want to thank you and thank our administrators for facing this issue head on. We have to do it. I know not every school is going to do it, and I think it's very much, it's a tribute to who Hastings is. It's a tribute to you and our administrators that this is something that we know we need to do, and it's incredibly hard, and it's even hard to find the way to do it. So I begin with thanks to everybody. One thing you mentioned, that teachers who are comfortable will move forward with some of this, and those who are uncomfortable may not. And that, I think that's always sort of been a bit of a problem because it allows teachers not to. And I don't want to, and this is not chastising teachers at all. I think what we need to do, though, is when those teachers who are not comfortable enough to tackle this, that we can work with them and get them to that place as quickly as possible, because we really, we need 100% participation in this.
So let me just clarify that I didn't, I'm sorry if I misstated. I didn't mean that some people were going to do it and some were not going to do it. Some people are kind of ready to hit the ground running right now. Some people are going to need a little more support. So the expectation is that we are all doing some level of work around this as the year unfolds. Some people might be ready to go September 5th. Some people might need until November 5th. And that's why our principals talked about embedding this type of work as part of their faculty meetings, as part late start Fridays, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So, yeah.
No, thank you. That's a great clarification. At some point, when we have more information, maybe we could create a timeline that we could share about when different things are going to happen.
Yes.
You mentioned that professional development would happen over a number of years. I understand that, and I guess we all probably feel, you know, the sooner the better. I understand that we need to vet, and maybe it may wind up being that we want to do seeds, but at the same time we want to bring in the gentleman who could come here. It may be, you know, a couple different entry points on this.
And I should just bring up that Derek actually was brought to my attention. He reached out to me because he knows I'm here, and he's doing work in Dobbs Ferry. So he just said to me, "Are you near Dobbs Ferry?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so that's where the conversation is.
And actually, to that end, you're going to participate in a meeting about hiring, correct?
Yes, we're going to. Myself and the three principals are going to head over to Dobbs Ferry on December 5th for a training on diversity hiring, like practices and processes.
And the name is that it's a group we've talked about.
NEMNET or NEM?
It's a good group. Okay.
I don't remember. Yeah, they are vetted. I don't remember. I'm probably butchering their name.
No, they're used. We had looked at them. They're used by a good number of public schools and
Yeah.
every impressive, you know, every private. I don't want to say impressive, but
No.
private schools that we've all heard of, from Sidwell Friends to Dalton.
Yeah, independent. Yes, right. Yeah,
So
they are.
So they
we're
certainly have
taking
a
it
lovely resume.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mention that, but we are doing that on December 5th or 9th.
Also, Race Matters Committee, I don't know how many of you have seen, last year they created a PowerPoint of just a number of things for our district to do. It was outstanding. So I guess, you know, you did mention that they're siloed, and I agree. We very much want them to be, I think, at the center of this, because their knowledge is terrific, and even what they created last year was so impressive. Maybe we should put that on the website.
Yeah, we
their
could.
presentation. That would be,
I have
let's
it
do
somewhere.
that.
It's in a Google slide. I know that. I remember Sonia shared it with me.
I also want to say thank you. As Tony said, we are having classes in our middle school. These, I think they're 10 or 11-week classes that every child will cycle through about race and racism. But I want to thank the 4 women who are drafting the curriculum, and that's Erica Williams, Erica Finnegan, Janice Mateo, and Sonia Cherry Paul. And I think we're just incredibly lucky to have this talented staff that is creating these classes. And, I just also want to say that I'm so glad we're doing this because the world certainly does not look like Hastings, and that if we don't help our children know how to be in the world as it is, we are doing a disservice to every one of our children. So again, thank you to our administrators, thank you in advance to our teachers.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
One of my questions is I totally understand like the short term, the long term. It seems like a really good plan. But in the interim, even beginning with the short term, I'm wondering if there's a guiding goal or philosophy that every school, every teacher can sort of use to sort of help them. And whether that's creating an essential question, which I know Hastings does EQs because I hear my daughter talk about them, and maybe scaffolding those EQs so that you have maybe a simpler one, what is equality at the elementary school. And then at the middle school, maybe talking about society and justice. And then at high school, sort of taking it to another level. And if there is some sort of EQ or, goal or philosophy, then that's something that every teacher can tap into. Whether you're a social studies teacher, whether you're an English teacher, whether you're a math teacher and you're teaching about equality in terms of numbers, but then you can change the conversation and sort of blend it. So that's just a thought and something that maybe people would feel more comfortable addressing the issues of tolerance and diversity if there was something concrete that they can look back to.
I don't disagree at all. And in fact, that is one of the challenges that we're facing in terms of developing something of that nature, because we want all voices to be included in the development of something like that, as opposed to me telling you, here's the essential question, or whoever.
Right.
And I'm not, that's what you were suggesting, but so how do we make sure that we allow for the time to make that happen? And so that's actually probably what we spent the majority of our time talking about today, because there's history here around this. And Gail Kipper shared, for example, there was a speaker that they brought in, I don't even know how long ago she mentioned his name, I don't remember his name.
Just last year, it was just this past year.
No.
It's something different, something different.
James
Oh.
Childs.
It was, I want to say it was like 3-4 years.
Yeah, and maybe even more. So James had come to work with the staff, and they started this work, and then they got to a point where you have to kind of unpack bias. You have to think about your own biases, and the staff had a tough time with it. And so this has to be very, very intentionally done, so that everyone has an entry point, regardless of what their comfort level is, which is what I think you're speaking to, whether there be an EQ or there be some overarching, philosophy or whatever. And to that end, we need to be mindful of 3 things, I think. And I don't know if I touched on this before, but I would argue that on some level we are going to blaze a trail in this work as a public school district, which means we're going to encounter the landmines before anyone else does. And so we're going to have to be unified as a community to deal with those landmines as they come up. Whether a teacher says something that probably maybe they shouldn't have said, or during a discussion a kid shares a perspective that might make someone uncomfortable. Those things are going to happen when we have these discussions. And I think it's important that we don't take instances like that to create barriers to the work, but instead use them to inform our practice. So I think that's the first thing. And to that end, there has to be a level of patience and understanding for our staff as well, right? Internally, we have to be patient and understand that this is going to take time to unfold. And the last thing, which is another thing you touched on, Christina, is really looking at it as a continuum. We're not going to unpack racism in kindergarten.
in the same way that we're going to unpack it in 6th grade, in the same way that we might unpack it in 10th grade or 12th grade. And so we have to think about what that looks like and make sure people understand that those are thoughtful decisions. And they're not, like, we're not, you know, Amy, who is the principal at Hillside, shared an activity that they did. There was an egg, I think she said, so the egg looks, I think it was hard-boiled eggs or something, and the activity basically is we kind of look different on the outside, right, because an egg can have a different shape. It might be brown, it might be white, but on the inside we all look the same. And that was the lesson they did in kindergarten, I think, is what she said. I could be wrong. I would argue that's an appropriate way to start getting kids to understand similarities and differences. It does not necessarily touch on racial justice, you know, or racism, but on a continuum may be an appropriate place to start. And so kind of looking at those pieces is where our primary focus is going to have to be. Like what do we think makes sense for our kids at different levels?
And I also think one of the challenges is, I mean, I know this as a teacher as well, and not just a parent, but one of the challenges is absolutely racism, and you know, looking through it at that lens is essential. But there's so many groups that are marginalized in so many different ways. And I think those groups also need to be addressed, whether it's through reading or whether it's through, you know, social studies or whatever it is. I would just be very careful to say that while race is absolutely important and essential, we can't simply focus on that. We need to look at the broader sort of spectrum of diversity, and race being part of it.
And I agree with you, and I think that is something that we also have to address mindfully, and respect where people have focused their energies, right? Whether it's the Race Matters Committee or the Diesel Committee, and also access resources that are available to us. I mean, we have the RISE organization, right, in town. There's another organization that someone told me about today, something around tolerance. I don't remember the name. So we also want to, you know, capitalize on whatever we can as a community, because actually in the end, this is not work that this can't just happen in school. Like, we can't just have these courageous conversations and then everyone goes home and, you know, our families have totally different conversations. Or not that we're trying to, like, you know, force a philosophy on someone, but if we're going to inform our kids' perspective, then we need to also inform our families' perspectives to support what will likely spill over at home and will likely come up at home. And as someone who is a child of immigrants, had I come home and start talking about race, my parents would have no idea how to, like, navigate that conversation. And so figuring that piece out too, and that came up in our discussions as well. So.
Any other?
Yeah, I'm glad you went first, Christina, because I think you really get at the core of what I was thinking about, which is, you know, it's been such a supercharged environment in this country, and I don't want the work that we're undertaking, that you're spearheading with the teachers and the administration, to be viewed as just a response to, you know, the Charlottesville and other issues that we ourselves in this community have faced last academic year, but rather something much more foundational. You know, essential questions through the building sounds like just a fantastic idea, and something that strikes me, following up from an earlier conversation about our district-wide vision statement and this idea of really helping or developing world and life-ready kids. And I think marrying that to being, you know, aware and comfortable and conversant around our many differences, to your point there, that our kids finish 12th grade really totally and completely comfortable with themselves and their own skin, you know, both racially and non-racially, metaphorical skin, and everyone else around them. And working with our staff under that premise. It's not about staff biases and you're a good staff member, you're a bad staff member because you have these biases. So yeah, it's just making a real listen, I'm excited. I think everybody here is excited about the work. I think the resources will be put forward to make the work happen. Obviously, we have to be mindful of teachers' time, which is always a big issue. We can't just say, hey, do this, do that, but you know this as well as anybody. But that it's communicated within the buildings and within the community as really foundational about making life-ready kids.
And that's the key piece, is that this has to be foundational, I think. And if I could open up to the Google Doc that I was taking notes in today, that's exactly, all we wrote was the word vision, and under it we wrote life ready.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? And there's no one sentence that's going to capture what that means, but it has to be foundational. It has to be very much a part of who our kids are. So they can successfully navigate life, right? And
Outside of Hastings.
Outside of Hastings, and I think that's the key thing. And when we think about inclusivity, I can tell you as a dad of a little boy who's like half the size of most of the kids his age, who has metal rods in his back, I can relate to that notion of being marginalized in a very different way than someone who might be encountering it due to race or due to gender. But it is real, and so this notion of inclusivity is broad, and we have to be mindful of that, and be mindful of it in a way to say that not any one of those things is more important than the other. Like looking at race is critical, considering gender is critical, considering ability, and that might not be the best word, but is critical. All these things are key pieces to that journey, because it will be a journey.
One other thought I just had as Tim was talking is the possibility is, as teachers are trying to sort of accrue more credits beyond their masters, going from column to column, maybe it would be, I don't know if it's possible, to come up with a list of professional development courses that address race and diversity, and providing that to teachers, not necessarily that the district will pay for it, because teachers always pay for their own, but to be like, hey, look, Facing History, Facing Ourselves at Teachers College is an amazing, 3-day course in which teaches about, through the lens of the Holocaust, but also about learning about yourself and who you are, and race, and Native Americans, and maybe it's possible to offer that sort of information for teachers who are looking to pursue more credits.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Good idea.
Are there any more comments on this? Okay. Next is business, and I think we have 3 different sections of business items. I think we can take them all as a consent agenda. Does anybody want to pull anything out? And just to sum it up, if you guys take a look, you'll see a lot of it, this is what I would call a lot of paying of the bills here. There's a lot of work that was done on our facilities that you'll see. There's some disposals, there's some instructors, therapists that we're hiring, and the specifics are laid out. So with that, may I have a motion to, let's see, this would be subheading A, items 1 through 9, subheading B, items 1 through 5, and subheading C, item 1. May I have a motion to approve all of these?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Okay, those in favor? Okay, so it's adopted. Terrific. Next on our agenda is the special education audit recommendations. So pursuant to the settlement agreement, we had a presentation on the special education audit, and it's at this meeting where we vote on which recommendations we are adopting. There were a total of 6 recommendations, and I believe that Tony and Laura, that your recommendation is that we adopt all 6?
Yes, and we really approached the unpacking of the audit as like those 6 being non-negotiable, like those are the things we're going to do that we have to focus on, and it's really just a matter of prioritizing how that happens, because there is so much work to do. So yeah, so we would recommend that you adopt all 6 recommendations, the primary ones, which are near the top. I don't remember, page 4 of the.
Yeah, there's 6 overarching ones,
Yeah.
and then there's A, B, C, D, E.
Right.
But
So the
if
6
you just
over.
look at the top
Yeah.
6.
Right. And this is not the actual implementation of how that's going to happen. This is like, the policy level, and then we leave it to
Yeah.
Tony and Laura and your staff, and I guess some of our gen ed staff as well,
Sure.
on how to implement that. So with that said, wait, is there any discussion? Does anybody have any questions? Okay. May I have a motion to adopt all of the recommendations in the audit?
So moved.
And a second, please? All in favor? Okay, terrific. We have adopted all the recommendations in the special education audit. And with that, I'd like to just throw in a few more thank yous. Thank you to Laura. Thank you to Ahava Steinbrenner for her work. Thank you to Tony. Thank you to our special education staff. Thank you to parents. Thank you so much for your input that you've given us over the past few meetings. Thank you to SEPTA for having meetings, pointing out things that are there, ways we could make this better. Thank you for including, whoever of us wanted to join in that. We so appreciate it. And I also want to state that some of you, I think it was at the last meeting or the meeting before, pointed out that there are some other things we could do that are not in the audit. So just FYI, by adopting what's here does not mean we can't do other things as well. So we're off and running.
We're
I
off
think
and
is where
running
we
is
are.
what we're doing. Got a lot to do.
Okay. Okay. Any more comments? Okay. So the next is our CSE and CPSA placement. I haven't run this vote because do I just say just a motion? Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the recommendations for CPSE and CSE?
So moved.
And a second, please?
Second.
All in favor? Terrific. Personnel, should I turn this over to you?
Yeah,
Because you
I-
always have fun things to share.
Sure. I don't know how much fun stuff I have to share, but I can tell you there's a lot here. But the ones I do want to kind of bring to your attention are that we were able to find a leave replacement for our FLES program over at Hillside, which was quite a process to find someone who could teach Spanish at the elementary level, but we're excited to be able to appoint, Kristen is her name. We also are going to be appointing and there are a bunch of like Schedule B things here, and an increase of someone from a .3 Matt ADPHO is going from a .3 to a .6 phys ed teacher. Someone is shifting over from special ed to elementary ed. Those are some key things. And additionally, as I had mentioned earlier, we were able to find a really strong speech and language pathologist who is going to be joining our team as part of the recommendation from the audit, who is going to be doing chairing meetings, servicing kids, making up missed services as well. Her name is Megan. She's being appointed tonight. In addition to, we were able to secure a third grade teacher for Hillside, as we are adding a class there based on numbers. So those are some of the highlights. And you met Michael and Tesfa already.
Okay, any comments or questions? Okay, may I have a motion to approve all of the personnel listings and the addendum? I think the addendum as well, but not Tefsa and Michael,
Right.
because we already approved
Right.
them.
Lisa, are you doing the CUD as well? Or
Sorry, let's do this. Okay, so definitely A, which is 1 through 15. B, which is 1 through 5 minus the 2 that we said.
And then there's a leave of absence.
C
and
is the leave of absence, yes, let's include that. And D, the resignation 1 through 2. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, may I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second, please?
Second.
All in favor? Terrific. Should we explain about?
Oh, Dennis, if you do want to know, Dennis Kiley
Kiley.
resigned as the special area coordinator because he's moving from Hillside to the high school. So he can't do that
I
position.
think we said that.
Which is why he's going to be the department, I don't know, is that on here? He's going to be the department chair for phys ed, but he's switching buildings, so he can't do this job. And that's where Michael Chappis, who you met a little while ago, he is going to be a phys ed teacher over at Hillside for that reason.
And we have an opening in department chair because
Yes.
Jesse Merchant
Right, 'cause Jesse-
was the department
right.
chair, and now he's our athletic director. So we're going to put them all on squares and just move them all
A
around.
little domino effect, yeah. So,
Okay, the minutes from the last meeting. May I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
All in favor? Terrific. Our student had an appointment, so she couldn't be here tonight. The next item is the goalposts on the Burke Field. What did I miss?
Committees, which is down at the bottom.
Oh, I'm
A.
sorry.
Yes, it's on there.
Do we have something under committees?
Well, so what we had.
Oh, I'm sorry, we're talking about this tonight, go ahead. Just jumping over a big portion of the meeting, okay.
So we do have, as a board, we have to flesh out a couple of board committees, one being audit, one being finance, and one being health and safety. Am I missing anything? So those three, and policy, yes, yeah, you're right. Sorry, yes. Actually, those three, it's audit, finance, policy that we must have. Health and safety is a district committee that we would like to have board members be a part of. And so we were talking at the last time, just kind of trying to figure out what those committees would look like. You all received from me like a little bit of an outline of grouping of committees. And so one of the things that I would ask is that we don't really get into some of the district-wide committees right now, because I still have to better understand what we need. Like, for example, today we started talking about the curriculum committee and what that might look like and what we might focus on, especially in light of the conversation we had around race and the need for PD there and how that can link to diesel. But we need to flesh that out. In addition to, I can tell you that I met informally with Rabbi Schechter, and I have met informally with Amy Nichols, and I have met informally with so many people, the youth director, the Parks and Recreation man, all wonderful people, by the way. And what we have, what I pieced together from what people have shared is, as an example, I would recommend that this year we put a pause on the community leaders group, and we let it really kind of redevelop in a more organic way based on need. And that was recommended to me from more than one person in these informal conversations. So there are a few things that still need to be fleshed out, is I guess what I'm saying. But there are board committees that are pretty standard, and so those are ones that certainly you can, I guess, act on, or we can talk about next time we meet. But that's kind of where we're at.
And we did discuss a little about possibly our next board meeting having a work session component where we flesh this out a little more about members of the public versus non-members of the public, back and forth with the public, how many people, what's a workable size. So that right now is anticipated for a work session in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I would say either September 11th or at the latest the 20th. I mean, that would be the latest if we are unable to kind of really unpack it, much more in the next 2 weeks. But we did start the conversation today as a leadership team. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean.
Say again.
The external auditor will be presenting to the entire board on September 25th, the end of the year audit report, which is required, that it needs to be presented and approved prior to October 15th.
Okay.
That's the sent to the state. Typically, the external auditor will meet with a subcommittee of the
board
prior to that September 25th meeting. So we should have, I need to have an audit committee in place within the next week or so.
So that one should not wait till September 11th then?
I
The
think it
creation
would be
of that?
better to have one now.
Okay.
I thought what you said when you started was that the board committees we could go ahead and talk about now. It was just the district committees that you wanted to hold off on, right?
I mean, yeah, certainly as a board, you can make those decisions about those three that we pointed out at the front end, right? The finance, audit, and policy.
And
Well-
health and safety, I definitely, because I would like to start scheduling those.
Okay.
The other thing I guess I'm just a little confused about is I just don't, like, what's the motivation behind sort of stopping and not, like, staffing up the committees, we've had in past years? I mean, because in terms of board committees, in addition to policy, finance, and audit, we've had the board operations committee, we've had the student board, the committee you and I were on last year. The liaison committee, we have the arts advisory committee, the theater arts advisory committee, we've had facilities separate from finance. Like, is there a reason that we're not just continuing with those committees and that we're backing off from them? Because I feel like we haven't, as a board, had a conversation saying we don't want to continue to have those committees. So I'm just a little confused, I guess.
I had made some recommendations based on what I had pieced together from other districts, from what had been available on the website, what was, functioning last year, but I have no qualms with going in the direction of doing that tonight in terms of looking at those pieces, or deciding on what committees, we are gonna have, like the theater committee is going to exist for sure, we met with. We have, there you go, yes, we do.
I think part of it might be just a little bit of the vocabulary, because I think some of those, when we were talking,
Yeah.
are more liaison-like than committee-like, like the person who goes to the student the student union. Like, have we called that a committee in the past or a liaison?
No, it's always been the student board liaison committee.
Okay, so no, I think that one's probably fine to move forward on. I guess it was the ones where there were certain, like curriculum.
Right,
I think.
that's why I'm asking if we can wait on that until.
Yeah,
but-
you sort of
And
pulled
that-
out a lot of
Yeah.
issues around that, so I
And
think
that
that's
totally
one's on
makes sense,
hold.
Lisa, because I think we've been struggling for years with how to structure a
Yeah.
curriculum committee, and I think that's a bigger conversation. But some of these others that I think at our last meeting, we were saying that they're more nuts and bolts, dealing with, like Maureen calls the facilities committee meetings when she needs to, when there are facilities
Right.
issues, and there are finance meetings when we need to have, like some of these, and the policy meetings, we just, we do them monthly because we get the new stuff from NISBA, because there's always policy stuff. So I guess some of them, it just seems to me, are sort of part of the nuts and bolts way we run the district, and
I think
get
we
it,
can
but,
move with some of the, yeah, no, I think what it was we were sort of looking at all the committees as a whole, and every time we did it, we would get stuck at certain
Yeah,
things, and we
yeah.
said, okay, let's wait till we're all together to discuss, but it just hasn't happened. So I'm fine filling in, some of the ones that make sense to Nat. I mean, I think, so, for example,
need
the
all of it.
policy committee, which has been the three of us in the past, and I will say, it sounds exciting, it's really not exciting.
it
It's-
doesn't even sound exciting.
but if you think like wonky, DC, we're going to be creating the vision statement, it's actually not that. If you look online under policies, you'll see them, they're numbered. Usually, the things we respond to are changes in laws that the governing association is alerting us about, and we decide what we're incorporating and how. Those meetings are open to the public. They try to make them fun, but anyway, so that,
And in
when we
fact,
can certainly.
there is a NISBA update right now that.
Yes.
So we have a need to meet then,
Yeah.
okay. So let me put out with policy.
I just have a question. I have a note here saying that there was a thought of maybe, and I know we could go ahead with the 4, but like facilities possibly being housed under finance.
So,
Yes,
so
that
the
was the
reason,
question.
the reason that came up, just so you know, and so it's not that I'm not trying to take away committee, we can have 8,000.
don't need 8,000.
No, we're not doing that. But because it came up in conversation as facilities being something that was more like a need, like, so we need to meet to do blah, 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 whatever it was, but more often than not, there was the finance component to it. And so it was more just almost, I guess, envisioning it as a subcommittee of the finance committee as opposed to its own standing committee. But I hear what you're saying, so it doesn't really, I think it's the same thing ultimately, but just kind of trying to capture it under one umbrella was the goal. But
There definitely have been times, like some things that come up in policy committee, we end up punting to a different committee, like the health and safety policy, we always
Right.
punt over to you guys. So, I
Right.
mean, there definitely are overlaps at times, but I think the thing I brought up last time that I'm a little bit concerned about, especially because even more of us on the board now have full-time or
Yeah.
close to full-time jobs outside, is that if you start combining committees that used to be separate, it means that someone who's volunteering for one of those committees has to be available for even, for all the things that we would normally have finance committee meetings about, plus all the things we
I
would
hear you.
normally
Yeah,
have
fair enough.
facilities committees
Sure.
about, committee meetings about. So it's not that I, in a theoretical level, don't see the overlap, but I don't necessarily, and you've been on, I've been on both committees at different points in time, so have you, I don't necessarily see us having had a problem deciding when to run something by one of the committees versus the other. I mean, I think we usually can, and sometimes we'll run it by both, but I'm just sort of sensitive to the time commitment involved when you start consolidating committees. That's
so we
my
have
concern.
audit, finance, facilities, policy are the 4 that I have listed. You had mentioned also board operations that I'm not familiar with.
That was sort of an as needed. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't need to, okay, fine.
What is the time commitment in terms of when exactly they meet?
I have no idea.
And I mean, no, I mean, I have to be honest. I mean, my last class ends, I have to be honest.
Christine, the way it has worked in the
Sorry.
past, at least for the ones that I'll schedule out, so for audit, finance, facilities, and health and safety, depending on who is on the committee, then I work with the three people, we send out different time frames.
Okay.
He'll tell me why, like Jody couldn't certain days with work to be like one day a week, like that day, we would know, like that day doesn't work for
Okay.
Jody, so we'll use these other.
Now, there are some committees that have,
Well, health and safety.
Health and safety.
Health and safety is the most.
Okay.
Yeah,
On that committee.
Okay.
Most of the other committees, with the exception of like the diesel and the community leaders, meet based on availability of the members. And they can be either, a little after school, because with Maureen, she's here all the time. So before or after school, whatever.
Okay.
or if Joe has to be here for facilities, for example.
We would come in, like, we would say, like, depending on who it is. The only
Yeah.
one that I think is sometimes problematic is health and safety, because we have so many people.
Yeah, health and safety is a tricky one.
We have staff, we have assistant principals, we have kids.
And like the community leaders and diesel are always right after school, so the
Okay.
teachers could come from the end of the school day.
Okay, so I guess as we're going through them, if we
Yes.
could just note, like,
Yeah.
this, you have to be available
Absolutely.
during the school day. That would be very helpful.
I thought Doug said at the last meeting he was going to do that, kind of a schedule.
Well,
We've been trying, and then we keep getting
Yeah,
stuck.
yeah.
And that's why we keep thinking, oh, we'll all be together and discuss this, and.
Well, why don't we start with audit? Can we start with audit and then go from there?
Wait,
I'll fill out the
May I
spreadsheet,
throw out
yeah,
one
yeah.
other thing with
Yeah.
audit? And I was going to propose,
Or no.
when I actually did my online training to be a board member, and they talked about audit, and the reason, I think it all started with your old neck of the woods, Roslyn, where there was a tremendous embezzlement case. Anyway, the purpose of audit is just to make sure.
I had nothing to do with it.
Just to make sure that everything is being done the way it's supposed to be done and to protect the taxpayers' money. And one of the things they did say is that it's absolutely fine to have a member of the community on that committee. I would like to recommend that we do reach out to and include a community member, I think for transparency purposes. I think it just sends a great message. So I don't know if anybody has any feelings about, and what I would suggest is, if we decide to go that way, in year 2, to make it an application process, a little more formal. In this year, if we do it year 1, because of the time constraint, I would say, like I said, I know there's one person that I've spoken with. If anybody else has an interest and, is hearing this or whatever, you could email, but we would have to make a decision very promptly.
Okay, and I will say with audit, I saw that, I knew you were recommending someone. I think that's a good idea. I just think that person will have to be, because that's the one where there is a little bit of time constraint, because I have to do it based upon the availability of the auditors, and they schedule the time.
Okay.
With the district, so
Okay.
it will most likely be sometime during the day. Like that one, I would say, like if you work.
So the
maybe
person would have to be able to be there.
They have to be available during the day. The other thing with, if you were to put somebody on it, I think school finance is an animal unto itself. Even CPAs, if they're not specialized in that, they can't even audit a school district. So I think that whoever is on it, it really would need to I think it would be helpful for them to get this meet with the group. Because I think walking into an audit committee meeting, that's gonna be 45 minutes, is not gonna really allow for them having any type of understanding of what we're talking about. Because it's fund accounting, which is,
And
I guess-
the audit committee isn't the one actually doing the
And the
audit,
committee
right?
is a
It's
whole,
the
right.
auditors that are doing the
course.
audit. They're
And
just-
since Ross on there has been a 5-point plan put in place, which means that we're audited by, we have 3 separate audits a year. Last year, we had 7 months of straight auditing out of 12 months, with an auditor every day going through 5 years worth of information. So, there are a lot of safeguards put in place. I hate Ross because it's such a outlier in it, but I think it would be great, but I would just want to say that whoever that's the person, I think it would be unfair to them not to have them in to kind
Sure.
of give them a little bit of
And to know,
background.
what the
Right.
time.
Jody, what were you doing?
I was going to say that maybe this is something that we could talk more about at the work session. I guess I think I'd like to think about it committee by committee. I think we could start off with just having people decide what committees they want to be on, which is, or if we want to do it some other way, that's how we've done it before, sort of thrown your hat into the ring of which committees interested you. But I actually think it's a little bit tricky if we decided, for example, with audit, to just ask somebody to do it who said, because there might be a lot of other people who are interested, and it just seems that we should, if we're going to do it, we have to do it in a way that is open and inclusive and transparent in terms of not just picking one person who happens to be interested, when there could be 5 people sitting here right now who are interested, or others.
Well, I have no problem. I had hoped we could do this at September 11th, but it sounds like we can't. I have no problem shooting out an e-blast saying, if you're, interested, send something back, by Thursday, and then we can see who's there. Anyway, it's not perfect. As I said, in year 2, it would be better, but I really, really like the transparency angle of having a public person. I just think it's, like I said, when I saw it on my online training, it made so much sense to me. And, especially if it's somebody who has a background, say a better background. I mean, I was on the committee and I'm a lawyer, and I was very untrained for that position.
But as I'm saying, even somebody with finance, it's just different, that's all I'm saying. I mean, it is a very different.
No, I get that it's different, but it's certainly, that person would be better versed than I am. But I have no problem shooting out an e-blast tomorrow with a short turnaround so that it can be in time for the meeting.
Because we had talked about, not to say, but I know she may be even interested because she had served the longest board member on that committee on audit, and she knew that a public, because she had mentioned that before she left, because don't forget, I can, as a member of the public, be on finance and audit if that would be helpful. And I actually was thinking,
That would be helpful.
I actually was going to recommend that she be, because she really has the most historical perspective on the audit committee. I mean, and she just, for whatever that's.
We could also, because the meeting that we have that is the time crunch for September is the report on what they've already audited for this past year. And it is open to the public, and everybody can come, and anybody, people can always ask questions at the meeting. So we could just put this in place and not make it you had to watch the August 28th meeting to know that this is out there, or something like that. So we could just say, as you go, and there'll be 2 more meetings probably this year of the audit committee, because they also have to meet with the internal auditor, and then set up next year's external audit focus. And, so it could be that this is not the meeting we have to have another person who's not on the board sit in on. It could be just going forward, and that gives us more time to.
So then put out the e-blast, see who's interested, have this meeting happen, let people know that it's going to be open to the
It's a
public.
way for them to come and look at what's going on.
We can do that.
Come to the meeting where the auditor does present in September, see what they're talking about, rather than having to sort of be on the spot to say, because it takes a while to get into the world of school finance.
So then the idea would be to address it at the September 11th meeting, but have this meeting put out an e-blast beforehand. That's okay with me. And just FYI, so the committee meetings are all open to the public. I did talk to our lawyers, by the way. We have tended to staff our committees with three board members, and if a 4th person is there, he or she is silent. Our attorney said don't have to do that. She said that you can have a quorum there, everybody can talk, because they're subject to the open meetings laws anyway, so they have to be publicly noticed and all the other things that go around an open meeting. So, so that's what our attorney said. That
So then the 4th person comes not as a board member, just comes as a citizen, basically.
No, as a board member.
Oh.
She said since they're publicly noticed, that we have to abide by the open meeting laws anyway for a committee meeting, so she said you can absolutely have those discussions.
So, Lisa, I just want to say that this is sort of hard to talk about, I think, but to disagree with what you're saying or question it makes one sound or look very not uninclusive or not wanting to be transparent. And I guess my only question of wanting to think about it committee by committee is it's a new idea, and I think in the past the committees have worked. I don't think, I don't know what other people would think. It doesn't feel like there was ever a problem with transparency if people wanted to come. I can remember a few times, especially with facilities, often people come to the facilities committee if they have, especially when they have a particular issue or things that have to do, I'm just thinking of when we were, an example would be when we were talking about the fields, and Steve Cunningham came sort of representing ASO soccer and having questions about how is it going to work out with Reynolds Field in terms of ASO soccer. And so often people will come to committee meetings when they have a question, or if they just want to sit in on the meeting. I guess I don't know.
Well, I think I would like to see a discussion. Where I come from personally, I'm looking for engagement where the community wants to engage. There are a number of ways to do it. And by the way, the community members on Board of Ed boards is not radical. I mean, if you look at like Patchogue, Medford, they have a whole form, for every committee parents can apply. But I guess the bigger picture is that opportunity for a two-way conversation, because this meeting really is not that kind of thing. We have the one-way public comment. Another model is, all our meetings are open, our committee meetings, if they could include that two-way conversation, so that if a person, say it is a particular facilities issue, and then, we have 5 people show up, that we can have those discussions as opposed to designating one of those people to be on the committee. It's another model, and
You mean in the committee meeting?
Yeah, to have a
But I think they
two-way
are like that.
conversation. Pardon me?
They are like that, the committee meetings.
I actually attended one where it wasn't, before I was a board member, and I offered, and I was not asked to.
I personally,
participate.
I kind of like the idea of having a community member sort of be on the committee, and I think it's great. I think, we're talking about taking this school district to be more inclusive, and as Tony said earlier, we're going to step on a bunch of landmines because maybe we're going into territory where other people in other school districts haven't. And I think that that's kind of scary when you think about it, because you're taking a risk. But by the same token, it's when you take a risk that you really can reap so many benefits and so many rewards. I think our community has so many people that have skill sets and knowledge and experience. And we're 7 board members. And yeah, we can bring a lot to the table, but there are other people who could bring things to the table too. And I feel like if it's something that we can do, I very much support it. I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign.
Sorry, we're getting a little feedback. Bad feedback. There we go. And I
So
will
it
point
was
out, in
me?
terms of the workload, do we know where it's coming from? Okay. In terms of the workload, we have gone from a 7-member board where 3 of our members did not hold full-time jobs to a 7-member board where 2 of our members don't hold full-time jobs. So it does give us a little bit of a crunch on our members' availabilities. So going forward with that now, so when it comes to audit, we've decided that we're going to put out a blast to see if anybody's interested and invite whoever, you'll give me the time, invite whoever to attend. Policy, and there's no rush on finalizing the answer on the public member if we're going to go that way on the other committees. In the meantime, we can staff some of those other committees, policy, finance, and facilities. Is that? And health and safety is not a board committee, though. That's a district committee. But we want board.
I would like a board, yeah,
Okay. So should we just start running down the committees then? Okay.
That's what I was.
Great idea.
thinking.
Great idea. Okay. No, thank you. That's terrific. Okay. Any other comments about committees? Okay. Goalposts at the Burke. This is something that we had raised before. There are goalposts at the soccer game field at the Burke, and we were having a discussion about whether to keep them up or keep them down. At the last meeting, I think what we had talked about was, I'm looking at you, Jesse, sorry. I'm not sure if we got the right message, but the idea was we were going to see how they were going to be used, and in the interim, you have created a schedule. Is it appropriate to either turn over to you or to Jesse at this point?
And Jesse and I, we spoke, and so I think if I misspeak, Jesse can certainly fill in for me. But Jesse, after being appointed to the position of athletic director, did review the plan for how the different fields were going to be used and considered input not only from based on his experience, but based on what the coaches shared as well in terms of what they had hoped to see. Where, for example, the soccer kids felt really strongly where they might randomly play a game on Reynolds, they really want the Upper Burke Field to be their home turf. And so the grass on that field also, as an aside, is grown to a certain height that is more conducive to soccer than it is to football. So that's an example. Initially, the plan was to see rotation. So a team might practice here, play there, then practice there, then play here. And based on what Jesse is proposing, that's not going to be the plan moving forward. That the teams, coaches, and Jesse, and I'm in agreement with them, feel that the plan that they have developed is a more sustainable plan. Better for the fields, better for the teams, the kids know where to go, et cetera, et cetera. And so looking at that at this point, we would ask you to consider removing the goalposts because they're not going to be used, and ideally have one of them moved to Lower Burke. No, the other thing, the practice field. There you go, where the football team does practice, and there is now like a temporary freestanding goalpost, and have one of these moved down there and planted on the field for the purposes of practice. At this time, unfortunately, we were not able to get a quote from either of the vendors that we had gotten quotes for before. And so right now, all we have is a quote to have them removed. So we don't have an estimate for how much it would cost to have both removed and one moved down.
I only one. We don't need one on each end.
We only need one, right, Jesse?
Presently, the practice field is not a full football
There
field.
you go. Yeah.
So we're really using it. It's about 70 yards plus an end zone. So it wouldn't make much sense to put one at the other end. Any practice would be heading in one direction, basically.
So what happens to the other goalpost?
Have a closet?
We're
Disposed of.
I'm going to put it in my office. No, we're going to redesign. I mean, actually, Maureen had even reached out to other districts to see if someone was doing a project that might be interested in buying a gently used, well, not even really used, gently,
Single goalpost.
single
Or like I
goalpost.
said, there's a possibility, but again, it's all different on to them, but it's like, maybe a school in Yonkers, if you were to donate them, that's the
Yeah.
other piece, that would probably be more of a donation on the
Yeah.
other one at this point. If we were to keep one, maybe another school like ours would have a need for like a practice field.
Right.
Can I ask a couple of questions?
Yes, please do.
So there was definitely, I'm just trying to understand, there was definitely some thought put into putting them there in the first place, and some thought that it made sense in order to help preserve the fields for there to be more migration. I mean, I would think that.
Rotation.
Rotation, yes. I would think that much the way, people can get overuse injuries from always doing the same thing, that if you have the same sport on the same field all the time, you're sort of running down the grass in the same parts of the field. Given that the field hasn't even been open yet for a year, and I realize that, Jesse, you've got a plan for what you want to do, but we haven't actually implemented the plan yet and seen if it's a workable plan and that it might not change a year from now. It just seems like before we've even sort of had a year's use of the field, I mean, we spent, what was it? They cost how much, Maureen? $30,000? No, 20? But we did spend money putting them up there, and it feels like we're sort of, and on top of which the plan that Jesse has may be a great plan for this year and next year, but maybe things change in subsequent years, and the goalposts are already there. It just feels to me a little bit premature to take down something that the district has spent money on. I do understand that there are one or a couple families that live adjacent to the Burke estate that don't like looking at them and feel that they're an eyesore, but I feel that I'm concerned that the district has spent this money and that we're sort of switching gears before we've had a chance to make sure that what we're expecting to want to do with our new fields is really the way it's going to play out. I'm not saying that ultimately we might not decide that it isn't what we want to do, but it's not like we can take them down now and then just stick them back up there a year from now. And I guess my other question is, if that Upper Burke field is being used or will be used mostly for soccer, are the football goalposts in the way of the kids playing soccer, or they're behind soccer goals? So they're not, so, I mean, that's my concern, and I'm happy to hear other people's opinions, but that's just where I'm coming from, that, you know, at the time we put them there was a lot of thought into sort of rotating things, and we spent this money, and I'm just a little bit concerned about saying, well, it's a sunk cost, and so, you know, let's just, because they're not in the kids' way of playing on the field if they're doing a different sport. I understand that they are in the view of people that live next to the field, and that there is at least one family, possibly two, that aren't happy with that. I just don't know if it's appropriate, given that we've spent the community's money already on them, to just pull them down before we've even had a chance to sort of see how things play out. And I'm totally open to hearing other people with different opinions or the same opinion, but it just makes me a little uncomfortable to do it that quickly.
If there was a trial period of a year in which the goalposts were kept there, would it be possible for the football team at all to do any practice on that field, or no, because they don't want to? I'm sorry, I'm looking like right at you.
I guess the question is, are we free to just address Jess on this?
Give you carte blanche. You can come up there if you like.
Come on,
Please come on down. Do you want to sit here? This mic works well.
Now we disconnected the.
Why don't you come here, Jesse?
Because, I mean, my other, I guess,
There's a seat
concern is that
if
until
you want.
we've actually had kids using the field, we don't really
Sit here,
know
sit here, use this.
how well the grass is gonna, you know, last or not last. Like, maybe we think this is great, and then we see that we're destroying the grass by doing this, and we want to do something different. That's what I just don't feel like we have any history to base it on, so.
Yeah, no, I can completely appreciate that approach, that thought. The approach that we're taking for this year, just so that everyone's aware, there is a slightly different type of grass that's planted there, and because of that, we're actually cutting it much shorter, which is pretty conducive to anyone that's played soccer. The grass is cut very, very short, compared to like a football field where it's nice and long and healthy. I have to be honest, our soccer and football coaches are very, very excited about having their own space, but again, that's for this year. That can always change. Your concern before about it being in the way, it's not in the way. I mean, it's tucked right in behind where our soccer goals are, so that's not really something for us to worry too much about in here.
I think one of my concerns was that if we're using football takes a real beating on the grass, and we just have no idea how well that grass at Reynolds is going to hold up. And it's a much, much, much better field. It drains well and all the rest. But where is the relief for that field? Even if it's 2 years on and 1 year the soccer plays there for the season, so we're not confusing him about where they go. But so that's kind of, I mean, I would hate for that field, after all this work and expense, to go down the tube because only football plays on it.
I tried to, I was talking to a lot of people, coaches, community members, trying to gather what their concerns were with, we have such a great opportunity this year with the new set of fields, but what are people's concerns? And one of them was the health of all of them, but really at foremost was Reynolds Field. And so my plan moving forward for this year to try to take that into account was to use really that practice field at the Burke Estate, which is where we had them move all of the heavy equipment for football, the 5-man sled. That's really going to be their home, an area where, even though we're on a little too early, damage to it is not going to be as big of a deal. While we're in the August, right, when throughout the preseason, we're having them practice there basically every single day. When the school year begins, so starting next week, the plan is on light days, so basically days where Mondays and Fridays we'll be using Reynolds Field for practice, but all of that heavy stuff with sleds and everything will be done up at the Burke Estate. So in fact, there'll be huge portions of the week where there won't be any teams on Reynolds Field. So my thought was to try to take a sport that does do some damage to the fields because of the size of the kids, the number of people on the field, and and really try to spread that out within a season. So they'll be on Reynolds Field 3 days a week, and they'll be at the Burke Estate 3 days a week. And we're going to have to reevaluate that after the end of the
Do you
year.
have any schedule where a field goes unused for a season?
Right now, no.
Because I think
That
that
was the original thought.
Yeah. Just because, I mean, when we were doing all the research on having natural grass and the concerns and how you keep those fields going, one of the things that some people, not everybody, pointed out was that it's very helpful if you can let a field rest. It's because all of our fields are being used every season. And summer's actually not a great time for the fields to recover, I guess. So I think that, to me, is one of those concerns longer term is, you know, when we just are getting going, we can sort of sprinkle it here and there. But if it's always being used, then that's a concern, you know, for the sustainability, so.
Just out of curiosity, what about field hockey, lacrosse? What kind of grass do they prefer, is preferable for?
Field hockey is also cut relatively short because anything longer than that, you wouldn't be able to find the ball. And lacrosse is a little bit longer. So again, it really depends on, we're really lucky that we have the luxury. In the past, what we've had to do is play soccer games on long grass, or it really what it ended up being was just dirt. So believe me, no one's more aware of trying to keep, we haven't had one practice day since the beginning of football, which was almost 2 weeks ago, where we haven't made accommodations for our fields because of either watering schedules, damage that we had begun to see, you know, whatever it was. We've been, just this past weekend, to give you an example, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, absolutely no teams were allowed on the lower Burke Estate field. And now at the beginning of this week, we've rotated practices onto those fields, and we're going to take Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday where we're not using the upper field. And that's almost a daily conversation between Joe, myself, and Terry Frank, basically the lead grounds crew.
What's the current quote to take them down? Dollar, like.
So
I'm gonna have to turn to you on that.
Right now, we don't have a quote we only have a quote for taking them down.
Understood.
Yeah, it's about $3,200.
Yeah, okay.
And that just has them being pulled out of the ground. The cement that's in there will stay there, will just be covered in.
Yeah.
But we have not gotten them to follow up with a quote about it.
$20,000 to purchase.
I think it was to purchase and implant.
Purchase and install, so you're looking at like $18,000 to buy them, provided it's kind of the same.
What's the downside of keeping
15.
them there for a year, as, you know, Donna is discussing, sort of, I think Eileen might be.
I can answer that.
Yeah, what's the downside?
The downside is that we've had 2 families communicate with us, and there may be more about them being an eyesore. And I don't want to minimize that. You know, I don't normally bring in my personal experience, but during the bond, we were the only family anywhere near Reynolds that supported turf, and everybody else, you know, who lived near it was very opposed to it. So I understand what it's like to live near. I learned this today in a letter that came to us from a family that lived there, that for that when Burke used to not be fields, you know, and that and in fact, I think there was a comment made last time, well, the families who moved there knew they moved next to a sports facility. That's not true, because at least the one family is represented here today did not. They moved next to a non-sports facility. But I think we have to be really careful with what we do and how we bother our neighbors. I really feel very strongly about that. And what was told to us today is that when the district decided to create fields at Burke, they assured the families near them that lived along the Burke that decisions would be made with them in mind. And I think we need to respect that promise. So I do feel sensitive, and I will go, and the other families that have spoken to us have also said very nicely, if you're using this field, cool, I support you. But if you're not, then I don't, then please take them down. So that's the downside to me. And as long as I'm talking, I'll just say a few other things. My understanding, and I'm not great with sports, but that the field that has that is a game field. And I remember doing a lot of research when we were looking into grass, probably as everybody here did, is that, you know, what hurts a game field is overuse. So we're only doing games on the game field to the extent we can, and we have a practice field. So we're not going to hold a football practice on that soccer field. That's a game field, right? Is that right, Jesse? You don't see us ever conducting a football practice on that field?
No.
Correct, okay. And even if you look at the field, like the sign, that the scoreboard is a soccer scoreboard. It's not even a football scoreboard, in addition to the grass. At least that's how, it's
To be
different
honest,
from the
I'll have to
Reynolds
look
one.
closer at that one.
Pardon me?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Oh, when I looked, it had words that were soccer words. I'm sorry, I'm being
Yeah.
so inarticulate on this.
No.
And I have to say, the third thing that really, that sort of put me over on this one is, I went back to try to find whatever I could online about what did the public vote on? And what I found online, and I can send it around, is the PowerPoint presentation that was given in March of the year we voted to the public. And if you guys remember, and I'm sure the board does, when it came to the Burke, you had two choices when you went into the voting booth. You had Proposition 1 or Proposition 2, okay? Proposition 1, if you looked at it, had two game fields up there, and one was a football field, and it even said touchdown in the end zone, so it was clearly a football field. Prop 2 oriented the fields at a 90-degree angle different, and it had a soccer field and then a slightly smaller field. So it decidedly did not have a football field. The voters voted and adopted Prop 2, the one without the football field. So again, as a lawyer, I have problems doing something that the voters didn't vote on. The voters didn't vote for a football field. They voted for the other one. So I can't tell you what went through every voter's mind, but I feel concerned about that. So that's a long answer to your question.
So if they voted on 2, why were goalposts put in?
I don't know.
I'm confused.
I don't know why they wound up there.
I don't think I think they were called multi-purpose fields. And I think when you're in the voting as opposed to design, you're not in full design mode. And I think when it came down to it, of course, I mean, even lacrosse tonight that was put on all of the fields was probably not detailed out on those, right? But it was like part of when the architects, when they went and created the specs that went out to bid, which were extensive. I mean, each line of detail on everything that's done it is so much more detailed than it's actually shown to the public, and even elevations of walls and slopes and everything slightly changes. I think what people voted on is that we were going to do multi-tiered fields. I'm just saying, I think that's how I think Christina's asking, how does that happen? It's like, but we also then said, well, we told the architects design, we want multi-purpose fields that can host all these different games. I think in that it was just probably put into the spec, and being that we could afford it within what the public allowed us to spend money on, I think that's why.
So that's why the goalposts are behind the soccer nets or whatever to multi-purpose.
Okay. It
Okay.
happened later, but with no way, just thinking that would be helpful, because like I think there was a thought that a lot of the teams would want to use Reynolds because it seems to be more it's a kind of a nicer facility. That's what I think the thought at the time was that soccer and everybody's going to want to use it, and girls lacrosse and all the teams, so it would be equity, that it wouldn't just be like Reynolds, the pristine, $2.5 million, field is only for football. Like, I think that it was the opposite intent. It was that if the football team had to move to Reynolds, Burke, because the girls wanted to play field hockey down there and have the nice home thing. That was honestly the only reason. And I think because, again, I honestly, until it was even pointed out, I think all of us always just thought all of these things were crossing that were just, everyone knew because it was multi-purpose. But obviously there was some communication that got mixed up, and now with what Jesse's adding, with the teams now coming and saying, no, we don't want to play at Reynolds. You know what I mean? Which we were kind of surprised about, honestly.
So.
But I will say, I hear what you're saying about multi-use. As a lawyer, I think I just have to disagree, only because these two proposals, I mean, you can't really see my iPad, but they are very different, and one clearly shows a football field and one clearly does not. So it may be.
The pictures, I don't know, I'm just saying, I know the pictures are even like those models, I don't think, although people could say, because I know we try to provide more detail, which probably backfired on us a lot, even having those models that a person voluntarily in the community made to try to demonstrate, because people couldn't understand, and then we were accused of like trying to push one model over the other, when for us to maintain the flat fields would have been preferable. Jesse knows that. Right now we're almost like short of statement because it's harder to maintain those fields. So although we think it looks better, it's a much larger challenge for us internally to maintain them. So we weren't trying to push that. We got accused of so. I just think if you want to take them down, but I don't believe that there was any deceit to them.
I don't think anybody's saying there's deceit, and I don't want that to be out there. No, I think it's just it's confusion, because it wasn't in the plans. It's
People didn't vote on that.
But no, just don't worry about the word deceit. Nobody's looking, it's not a blame game kind of thing. It's just sort of a question of how did we get to here, so we can understand whether we should stay here or whether we should change it. That's all that's going on.
I think Jesse, what he's saying, or whatever you think the long-term uses will be more, I think, but again, that was, at least in my view, the rationale was that everybody would use them, and again, I think the concern was not to just say that Reynolds was a football field. That's what I heard communicated, because I think people didn't want it to be viewed as that, because a lot of people pointed out, well, we have such successful soccer teams, and they should be able to, we thought that everyone would be fighting at the bit to be out of Reynolds, and then that way would allow, like the modified boys football team, if they have to have a game, and yes, we didn't have a team for the first time last year in 20 years or so, but if they do have a team and they play, would a modified team take Reynolds over varsity? I mean, that was just the thought, that then if they needed to play, they could play at the.
Well, and also, I mean, the kids this year may want to play in particular places, but I guess my concern is that facilities are something that you're building for the long haul, and that there just hasn't been any time yet to even have any experience and see, right now, before they've done it, they're saying that this is the way they want to, but also we don't really understand yet how much damage we're going to do to any of our fields, how hard it is going to be to maintain the grass. Maybe we're going to need to rotate something, or as Eileen said, rest a field. Like I said, I'm not saying that maybe we decide at some point that we don't want to have football at all because of concussions or whatever. But and then obviously and then you certainly don't need goalposts. And if they were. I'm just concerned about sort of making the decision too quickly when we haven't had any chance to experience using the fields yet, and and see how it turns out, and what we where we're sort of really going with it, because it's not like they're meant to be removable goalposts that we can take them off now and put them back, and then take them off and put them back. So that's my issue.
Actually, removable goalposts, that may be the best answer, because again, like I said, I'm very sensitive to the fact that we're offending, I think it's 5 families at this point, and I don't think we have the right to do that. It's not what was voted on. And as of this year, we're not using it for football. The only way we would is if a lot of series of ifs actually happened, and there's a lot of moving pieces there. So again, my recommendation would be take them down. We already have one portable goalpost. Should we ever need that for football? Again, I don't see it happening. It doesn't sound like it's going to happen. We can always get another portable one and put it up there without offending the families that live there, especially in light of the fact that the district made a promise to those families when we created the fields at the Burke that we were going to take them into consideration. Now we gave them something to vote on. They voted on it, and we did something else, so we're being particularly inconsiderate to the families that live there.
Can I just ask one question, if I may? Because I'm still trying to learn this. If necessary, could a football game be played on that field where the goalposts are? Is it big enough for a regulation football game?
Yes, big enough, yes. There are some small things that aren't there, like a press box and other things that typically a football field would have. Honestly, I don't know about the scoreboard. I'll have to look at that. But that
The scoreboard at Reynolds was used for football and for soccer.
Right, typically, there's more things for a football scoreboard than it would be for a soccer. But some of those are smaller obstacles, right? Some of those are smaller obstacles. It is large enough, absolutely. Right now, it's set up only for soccer, but it has the dimensions, which is where they, of course, got the uprights from.
Okay.
Tell me again, in your words, the thought process of putting the goalpost there initially. What was the?
Yeah, to be honest, I wasn't around.
Yeah, I guess.
We still don't have the answer on
overall,
that.
the overall thought process.
I think that when we went to the architects and we always were, again, just in the meetings when they went to design, I think we told them that we wanted field rotate. Once we went to the floor, without having the grass. Right, the grass. And again, I think it was just like a detail that was in there that I don't think anyone, that it was even conscious. Like if you were to ask me later, like, oh, was that part of it? I would have said, oh yeah, it was. Like it's just part of the equipment because we want But again, maybe then looking back at the pictures, it wasn't there, you know,
And under the current formulation,
I mean, I guess.
do we have the field space available with one at Reynolds and 2 larger fields up at Burke? I guess 3 larger fields up at Burke when we're playing across the across the baseball field. Do we have the capacity to rest a field for an entire season and under its current formulation?
That's a Jesse question.
Essentially, that's what we had last year, right? If we take away Lower Burke Estate in this example, which didn't exist last year, it was a small kind of practice modified field.
Right.
If we take that away, you're putting essentially potentially 5 soccer programs on one field, 2 field hockey programs or teams on another field. Your football would bounce between the practice field and Reynolds Field. So it would allow for the resting of that new Lower Burke Estate. In my opinion, which is why I came up with the plan that I had, it's going to put an incredible amount of stress, knowing that we're already on the fields a little earlier than we should be. It's going to put an incredible amount of stress on the fields that we would be on. So my thought going into this year was to try to use all of the fields, because we have them, as lightly as possible.
It's not this year that
Right.
I'm worried about. Like, these are brand new grass, everything, we just walked it today. Everything looks fantastic. It's 2 years from now when we just spent millions of the taxpayers' dollars and one's a mud pit, and we say, how do we rectify the situation? Because we decided not to go with turf, which is good, that's fine. But the idea of being able to rest one and affect that could be important. And we don't know which is going to be the mud pit.
Right.
We don't know if Reynolds is going to be the mud pit or Lower Burke's going to be the mud pit, but we're an active district, and we put ourselves in a situation too where I think if we're really skittish about, if we hamstring ourselves into being very skittish about usage of the fields, we're also going to be at odds with all the community groups that want to use the fields. I'm very sensitive to that as well, where I know that I'm going to get an earful tomorrow, actually, about soccer, club soccer's inability, from what it sounds like to me, to use these fields in this coming season. And we're going to be at odds with what Dobbs does and what Ardsley does relative to supporting sports outside of the school system. So merging those two things together, maintaining maximum flexibility of the fields, maximum possible usage of the fields, which then creates an environment where the most number of people inside of the school and outside of the school can use it. I'm concerned about putting ourselves in a situation which this becomes the default only thing can happen here. Only X sport can happen on X field, Y sport can happen on Y field is what I mean to say. So, okay.
Let me ask a follow-up question.
Okay, thank you.
And again, like I said, I feel very concerned about the families that live there, again, based on the fact that the district made them a promise that I think we need to honor, and based on what the vote was. Going back to what Nana said about portable goalposts, how does this ring to you? Because again, we don't know we're ever going to use that field as a football field. There's a lot of moving parts to get to there, if that ever happens. We already have one portable goalpost. What if we were to take the 2 down, the eyesores, take the eyesores down, and then should we ever need, we already have one portable goalpost, we buy another. I believe they're inexpensive.
To be honest, it was purchased before I started.
Okay, so
yeah, they're not $20,000.
They look very inexpensive. We could flesh that out. But is that a good solution? So say we did need to use whatever, we have to rest Reynolds, and that needs to be a football field. Is there any disadvantage to a portable goalpost over a big yellow goalpost?
That's something I don't have experience with from an official game field standpoint. That's something I'd have to look into and get back to you on.
The second question I have along those similar lines, which I just wanted answered before we vote on taking them down or not taking them down. It's like, if they go down, I don't want to put up one and get rid of the other and be sitting on orphan posts. It makes no sense. We got a lot of space that's going to be worked on down on the waterfront. If I can store those things on the waterfront somewhere for 18 months, it isn't going to kill us, and it costs us $3 grand out of pocket to take them down. If it turns out we need them back up because we have a mud pit at Reynolds and we need to rest it, at least I know where high-quality goalposts are. And then if we decide this is working great, we don't need them, this is the soccer pitch, this is the football field, we can donate, literally just donate, I don't know if anybody's going to want them, but to a school that could use to upgrade facilities, and we'll get rid of them in 18 months, 2 years, and I'm fine with that. But I don't want to just get rid of them because, and I fully appreciate, you know, as a homeowner and as, you know, I have a car parked in front of my house, I get annoyed. You know what I mean? Like, and so I know where they're coming from. I just don't want to be immediately responsive. Some serious thought went into this plan. We need to have fields that are, you know, usable, refreshable, available to the whole community. So whether it's temporary goalposts similar to that movable one that we have, or if we take these down, that they need to be available to us. And then I'd be sort of more in a better place to move forward and vote on it.
Well, should we then delay this vote and get more information about if we were to remove them and store them, and also what the cost of an additional portable goalpost would be, and then revisit this at our next meeting? Does that sound good to everybody? Okay. Okay, we're done with comments on this?
I would just like to follow up, as someone who was on the facilities committee through the whole bond issue. I just want to stress that part of why we had originally suggested doing turf was because of the limited fields that we have. And obviously when we had to change our direction, and I think, you know, we could all agree that we now have beautiful fields, and I think the beautiful grass fields. I just want to urge you to keep in mind the whole issue of this is apart from the goalpost, but the field, just in general, field rotation, even though, and believe me, you know I'm sensitive to coaches, and even though coaches or parents may prefer to have, always use a certain field because it's better, I think one of the things we were so concerned about was the quality of what's going to happen to the fields, and were we going to be able to maintain them? Forget about having the staffs maintain them and even the cost, but what's going to happen to the fields? And yes, they look, you know, I love it every day when I drive by Reynolds Field, but, you know, we know what happens with a football season, and so I just want to urge you to kind of keep that piece, and even in talking to people, maybe talking to some of whoever we spoke to in terms of the grass that we use and the seeding, in terms of how we best, I mean, it's just one more complicated variable, but I think in the end, we spent, the district, the community spent a huge amount of money on this renovation that I think has done wonders really for the district and for the athletics in the district. But
absolutely,
we don't want to be finding ourselves not too far down the line, you know, debating what we're going to do and how we're going to remedy this, and having to do a whole season where we're renting out fields somewhere else to practice again while we, you know, rehabilitate our field. So I just want us to have a little forethought about that stuff.
Just to give a little preview, obviously, the fall season we have more athletic programs and teams than we do typically in the spring. Mm-hmm. And so with that in mind, hopefully we will have some extra space and the ability to make, maybe it's a little bit of a shell game, but some decisions about which fields need a little more TLC, or maybe a season off, or how to start that in the spring. So that, again, it's already on my radar. It's conversations that we've already had, both Joe, Terry, myself, and then obviously Tony's been involved in meeting with coaches and all kinds of stuff. Obviously Maureen's been a part of it as well. So it's absolutely something that's been talked about and considered, and we're just going to have to almost play each season you know, as a little independent little island and figure out exactly what we're going to do, you know, moving forward.
And I think, like Jesse just mentioned, and one thing that, you know, we're really conscious of this year is keeping everybody off the field, but, you know, eventually we have to, the community has always used the fields here, so how we work them back into it, it's just that this is the first year, and they really we're not even really, we wanted to wait a few more months before we even got on them, but we had to get on them.
It's supposed to be October, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So long-term, because there is like a maintenance plan and a rest plan, and that's the only way to maintain them is to rest them and keep the maintenance on them, which is expensive, so. But I think to Tim's point, we also have to be sensitive that we have always supported ASO and all the overtime soccer organizations, so we have to also find a way of allowing them to, I would think, we want to give them, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Is to allow them to use it also, so how that fits in also with what we're doing, right, with the field rotation.
Yep.
Okay, in light of time, I'm going to say, does anybody else have any more comments on this? All right, so we'll revisit this issue, hopefully with a little more data at the September 11th meeting. Okay, next item is something that we began to talk about at the last meeting, and that is the question of whether we want to submit comments to the SUNY Charter Schools Committee. The issue is that the SUNY Charter Schools Committee has proposed a modification of teacher certification rules. And they're saying that they're having a shortage of teachers, either applying or being retained at their school. So they want to make teacher certification much easier and say, you don't need a master's anymore, you don't need extensive student teaching. All you need is a bachelor's degree from any college in any topic. You need one 30-hour class, and you need 100 hours of student teaching. And more bang for your buck if you want to be a special education teacher. You can add, I think, an extra 12 hours of classroom instruction and 75 hours working with something related to IEPs. So I think we all agreed that we were not happy, that does not create a teacher. One of the questions that Jody raised is it appropriate for us as a Board of Ed of Hastings-on-Hudson to be giving comments? I can give you a few comments to that. I sent you all a draft comment because we said that I would draft something, and that's here today. We talked about the idea of, do we say something because we think it's the right thing to do, and we take an oath to support the Constitution of the State of New York, which requires that every child get a sound education. That's one reason. That's sort of a broad, high-level reason. I also said that, I don't think I made this point yesterday, this is something that I've thought about, and it really concerns me. As you know, there's a big, big push for charter schools, and this is not to say charter schools good or charter schools bad. I am fearful that if this rule passes, it only relates to teachers in certain charter schools, certain high-achieving, as they call them, charter schools. Having watched the trend in education reform, as I have been on top of it for the past 5 or 6 years, I would not be surprised if this rule were to pass. 2-3 years down the road, suddenly these students, these teachers are saying, I don't want to work in this charter school because at this particular one I have no work-life balance. I'm not unionized, whatever. And we read a lot about that. That those teachers, those charter certified teachers, start to apply to public schools. They're a lot cheaper. And I would not be surprised to see a legislative push to say to public schools, you can take in these teachers with this certification. So I think that this does present a risk to public schools. Again, there's a few moving parts in there, but you all know how much I watch these trends, and that would scare me because I like what we have here in our teachers, extensive student training, student teaching, master's degrees, sometimes PhDs. So that's another reason. I will also add that I did reach out to Lisa Davies, who is the head of the Westchester School Board Association. Her associate got back to me, and they did Lisa submitted comments. So that's our Westchester Association, and I believe we only have 2 charter schools in Westchester. So with that, I'll ask if there's any thoughts, comments.
On the whole, I don't have any objection. I think it's not a good idea to have this change in teacher training, but I don't know how you would get that step that you just made where they would come here and be cheaper. We have one teacher's contract. If you're we're talking about creating an alternate system of teachers, and I just think that sounds very unlikely.
It's because they would have bachelors and have their certifications. You don't need a master's under this.
They will come onto our schedule. And if you're going to be a public school teacher in New York, you have to get your master's within 5 years. So those requirements don't change if you're going to teach in public school. These charter schools are running their own business. So.
No, what I was saying is I wouldn't be surprised to see a push to our state legislature to give these charter certified teachers status to become hired by public schools and get paid on the bachelor schedule. I may not have articulated that well. Do you get what I'm saying? Because you'll have all these, they'll say, oh, I have 2-3 years of credit. The change would have to be made in the legislature. But remember, we have John Flanagan, who's head of the Senate.
I hear what you're saying, and that could happen if the Constitutional Convention in New York State is opened up. So there is a vote, I think it's November 9th, on whether or not to open up and have a Constitutional Convention in New York, and that would be an opportunity to maybe bring some kind of legislation in like that. And it depends on what representatives are going to be and delegates, if they are pro-charter school or not. So I hear what you're saying, but I also hear what you're saying. I think there is a way that
I think
could.
we're pushing back on this. I'm not sure that's a strong argument.
Sorry, is anybody pushing back?
I think we're pushing back, and because I don't think that there should be separate systems for.
Can you say that louder, Eileen? I'm sorry.
I think that we should support, send this letter in saying that we think that teacher certification should remain as it is. It should be rigorous and stringent so that the kids, whether you're in a charter school or in a public school, are all being taught by the same caliber of teacher, to the extent that that's possible within the range of qualifications that you need. So I have no problem doing that at all. I just didn't really buy Lisa's argument about suddenly we're going to be having 2 different pay scales for our teachers in public schools. And I don't know if
I actually could see, I mean, I absolutely hear what you're saying, and I think, in terms of the unions would definitely push back against it. But if there is an opportunity legislatively to make that change, and the Constitutional Convention, if it is voted, so every 20 years, voters in the state of New York can vote to have a Constitutional Convention or not. And if the voters of New York decide to do that, it would affect not just teachers, but people in all different walks of life and all different jobs. And what they can do is they can change qualifications, they can make new laws, they can make changes. And very often the delegates who are appointed to these positions, not only are they paid positions, but very often they're politically motivated. So if there is a political motivation and push to go towards the charter schools, which there may or may not be, I could see there being something. So I'm not saying that, this isn't like a scare, but...
Listen, I think ultimately, though, the legislator can't change the contract that we negotiate with our teacher association in so much as if we agree to a certain pay scale. So, because what I'm hearing, I understand what you're saying, but I think the idea is... I
was saying they come in at a bachelor's rather than a master's.
Right, so it's not that you're creating a different salary scale, it's that you're accepting that, teacher B is coming in with this...
A teacher, so they could change the rules so that a teacher could just always exist on the bachelor's line?
Because that's what this allows. Right now, at a charter, you can be certified with just a bachelor's and you never have to get the master's. That's what this is saying.
So that's the issue, right?
And I think like Hastings would never probably, I don't see Hastings as a school district that would be hiring, our standards are different. But I think this may impact other districts in New York.
Yeah.
Okay.
The only thing on this specific draft, reading it over, I read it initially when you sent it and thought completely fine. Just reading it again right now. Point 3, the proposal creates a second-class set of teachers with minimal training who would teach our most. I think there's just there is a jump in logic being made that the lack of training therefore equals less qualified.
Yes.
And qualification and training is not really what you intend to say. Okay. So it may just need to be, which if you want to make that...
Do you want to massage it and send it back?
Yeah, I can. I'm happy to.
Okay, great. Thank you. With that massage...
one other thing in here, just quick edit.
Yeah, sure.
Just in the paragraph before number 2, about halfway down it says the effective teacher can hone in on the child.
Hone.
Yeah, I went back and forth on. I went back and forth on hone or home. I think both actually work.
You mean home?
I believe it's home. I believe the correct word is home. I'll look it up, but I believe the correct word is home.
Like
Where are we?
hone is to refine, home is to
Zero in.
zero in on. I went back and forth
Yeah.
thinking the exact same thing and did come around that
Home
home.
skills or home in on a sense.
Yeah.
Hone is to
Yeah.
sharpen or
Yeah,
whatever.
to
Home is
sharpen
to
is to-
zero in.
yeah.
So I believe home is correct.
Home
I thought it
Yeah.
meant
I
if you
did
hone
change
in
Andrews
on a
to her cousin.
child,
She's not
you're
the- she's
kind
not-
of focusing on the child.
Yeah, but
Home is to Zoom, kind of.
But you know what, if
Okay.
it's that confusing here, maybe.
And I changed the
Then
title of
I,
Andrews
then
to her
I
cousins.
take it back my
Which is not in your
suggestion.
draft, but I did
I
change
was,
it.
I spent time.
Okay,
I
so.
don't think I've ever heard
So the
this.
next step on this, and I'll just ask for a vote on this, is I think the window to submit comments ends in early September. So just a vote to submit these comments with Tim's
And
massaging
I'll
of
write,
it
I'll cut that
um,
paragraph for you.
to the SUNY Charter Schools Committee. So may I have a motion to approve submitting? And may I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. Okay, moving along. New business. Okay. Second public comment. Would anybody like to speak? Okay. I have to invite you up to the
What
mic.
about the new business item though?
Oh my God, I'm sorry. I'm not very good at this. Sorry, one last thing. We have to vote to adopt the code of conduct, is that correct?
No.
Code-
We're having a hearing.
We have to have a, right.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood this. Okay. So wait, so the code of conduct public hearing is September 25th at 7:30. If you want to come, please do. And we're required to approve it. We have to wait until after the hearing. Is there anything else we need to do on this agenda item? No. Okay. I'm sorry. Now public
Can I
comment.
just ask, why is the student searches a separate, is there a reason?
That's how you did it last year. You actually did not approve the code of conduct last year. You only approved the second part that you rewrote of the code of conduct. So both pieces have to be approved.
But it doesn't, the student searches fit someplace into the code?
Right, but we didn't do the overall code of conduct last year, so.
No, I know, but if we're gonna do it this
Right,
year,
so it all
this
has to
would
get put together.
this piece would be
Right,
in
it
it.
has, but we
Okay.
have it separate, as a separate policy outside the code of conduct. It's just our board did it.
Oh, I don't, okay, because, yeah, we'll look at
So it has
that.
to be enveloped into the code of
Yeah, it has
conduct.
to be-
Right now, it's separate. It is
Oh,
not within
okay,
the
I
code
don't
of
think it was
conduct.
supposed to be. I think we,
Right.
I know we approved that piece, but I thought it was gonna be inserted because the code of conduct, the way,
The booklet, right?
before we renumbered everything, sort of every section of the code of conduct had actually been a separate policy in our old numbering scheme, and so now all the sections are like 5,300 point something, but they're all supposed to literally be part of the code,
So
not
if
as
we
a
have a
separate.
policy meeting before that, we can decide where
Yes.
you're going to insert it within the code of conduct.
It should go numerically though, Janine, because I think every section has, like I said, it has a number. So it should, there should be a place that it logically falls, but I can take a look at that.
I have a question. I don't know if legally it's sort of couched in here, but I guess I have a question regarding students and ICE. So if ICE was to come into the building and try to interrogate a student, is that part of police involvement in searches and interrogations of students?
That's a
So-
good question.
I don't think so,
I-
because ICE isn't,
What's
I
that?
think it's separate.
yeah, I don't think that's, because the student searches, if I'm remembering correctly, specifically talking about police.
Yeah, I should be.
That's a
That may be, that may need a little research on
Yeah,
it, because
it's
I'm just thinking,
federal.
ICE, I think, is federal, and police is state.
Yeah,
and
it
local.
was discussed again at a conference that I attended,
Yeah.
because
Well, especially-
Even
there's,
if it's not included, we should have it something.
yeah, we
Yeah.
should
Somewhere.
have policy, and it was suggested that not only do we have policy, but administrators should be informed, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
What time does it meet?
It's really exciting. It's really exciting. Okay,
We'll make it
so
work for
that's
your
a to be
schedule.
continued, and then we'll look into that.
Yeah, but that is one of those things, that usually, if something is like that, and
Yeah.
that's coming up, that's usually the kind of thing that the policy service that we belong to from NISBA
Yeah.
will
Okay.
tell us, like, you know what, with this change, you should make sure that you either have a policy or address it somewhere within the policy.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's
Was the
usually-
conference you went to a NISBA conference?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was in Long Island, it was the 2017 law conference.
Yeah. This NISBA is our policy service, so if they'll, I'm sure it'll
Okay.
be in the next policy update.
No, that's important, that's hugely important.
Important one, so.
Okay, second public comment. You're the next contestant.
Here, Lisa, use this.
Yeah, I've never done this
Someone
before.
use this. Yes, I hooked up.
Can I sit? Okay. Lisa Henline, and I live at 55 Burnside Drive. So I'm one of the families that keeps being mentioned in this conversation. There are 4 houses that are directly behind the Burke estate. We're the one that's most in line with the goalposts that were put up. I know 2 of my neighbors already sent emails. I don't think you got, Carmen New lives next door to us, and I don't think you got that one yet. And the Owens sent an email, and then we have new neighbors on the other side of our house, and I just spoke to them before coming over, and I don't know if they're writing a letter or not. I don't really know them. I didn't want them to feel pressured, but they're not really aware of like everything that's happened because they literally just moved in a couple weeks ago, but they may or may not send you a letter. I have so many thoughts in my head from this whole conversation, but one of the things that I think is the most important points is, Lisa, what you spoke about, that the plans that we all saw and voted on, there were no goalposts, and I think it's very unfair to say, well, they just got added in, you know, afterwards. We were always talking about multi-purpose fields, when throughout that whole bond discussion, everything was so specified in detail, from the, you know, starting with the turf, the type of turf, the infill, the temperature, you know, and then moving on to everything else that was going to happen. Everything was so specific for townspeople to vote on. So I think now to come back and say, well, we spoke about an all-purpose field, there just happened not to be goalposts on the plans, but we decided to put them in after, I just think is incredibly wrong. Like, I just don't think that even makes rational sense. So that really bothers me. My kids are all athletes. One of them has graduated already. I totally support sports in Hastings. I wanted turf. I wanted our fields to be improved. They were pathetic and embarrassing before. They, you know, they seem to be much better now. But the idea of having goalposts right behind our house, if they're not going to be used, I just think is unfair, because they are really ugly. They totally stand out on the field that is green. And that was my whole point. If they're not going to be used, they shouldn't, we weren't told that they were going to be there, and it's not fair to have them there. And in general, so many people have questioned why they are there. Not just people on Burnside, but many people that have, you know, walked by and seen the fields, and no one really seems to understand why they're there. And I think it was a mistake that they were put there, but no one wants to admit it. It was a huge waste of money. There were no bleachers put on the plans. Those got forgotten about. Now those have to get added on, like someone put goalposts, but no bleachers. So, you know, there were a lot of mistakes, and I don't think it's fair just to leave them just because someone made a mistake or someone didn't actually think it was important to let people know that, you know, that was going to be part of the plan, and just add them in afterwards. There are, just as an aside, there is so much unused left remnants from what was there before, like lying around the field right now. There actually are goalposts, probably the old ones, just lying there. I don't know if you saw, like if you walked around the top, like right behind our houses, the old goalposts are lying there. There are bleachers, all the old stuff. It's just like a garbage pit, really. It's pretty unsightly. Like, I don't know what's happening with all that stuff and whose responsibility it is really to like clean it up. And even our new neighbors today, just as another aside, where they have 2 little kids and they just had a baby, were complaining about the glass, that there is broken glass everywhere, everywhere behind our houses. And I'm not sure where it's coming from. We thought for a while, you know, it was teenagers breaking stuff, but my husband's wondering even if there's, you know, there was just a lot like under the top layer of soil, and, you know, and it's just like, you know, from construction, I don't know, and it's all just like coming up, but it's everywhere. It's actually really dangerous for dogs, for children, whatever. And I've mentioned it. I mean, I see the grounds guys all the time. I mean, we've been in constant contact through everything that's been done, and I'm always mentioning the glass to them. I know they're pretty busy, and the task of keeping these fields in good condition is a really big one. But
I think something needs to be done also just with the glass because it's really, really unsafe. And our brand new neighbors are even noticing this. But anyway, I'm very curious about just what's happening with all the old stuff that's all sitting there. I mean, I don't know if you saw it, but it's, but there are goalposts lying on the ground. Like I literally think it's, some, I don't know where they're from, but they're just like, all this stuff is just lying there. It's, I think before starting to have games and things, it needs to be cleaned up because it's just ugly. That's a separate, it's a separate issue, but I know at least 3 out of 4 of us feel pretty strongly that they shouldn't be there if they're not being used. I mean, I think, that's exactly what everyone expressed in their letters. And I know I had another point to all this, but I can't think of it right now. I kind of lost my, my train of thought. I don't know, that's pretty much how I feel. So, oh, I had just a question. This is just a question. Just also because I spend a lot of time just walking around. I have noticed that there are a lot in the trees that were planted around the field after they did the initial, because we've lived there, it's almost 16 years, so we lived there before there were any fields. It was just forest. And there were trees in the original, when the fields were originally put in, about 15 years ago, because it was done like right after we moved in. They started cutting down the trees and blasting and all that, and so trees were planted around the field. And I've noticed that a number of them have those strangler vines that are growing through them, and sometimes I pull them out. They're like really working themselves up the trees, and they kill the trees. And so I'm wondering like whose job that is, because some of the trees are already dying. Those were also expensive, and they also helped to make it prettier and to block, our view also, from the field. But some have died, and it looks like others are going to die. And I was just wondering whose responsibility it is to, like the maintenance of the trees. And I have no idea, but I just wanted to mention that, as an aside, something I just noticed. So.
Thank you so much for your comment. So far as the litter and the trees.
Yeah, we can look into that. I'll mention it to our director of facilities to see what his familiarity is with either of these things. Yeah. Thank you for bringing.
Thank you, Lisa. Any more people for public comment?
I'm Karen Hammerness. I live at 37 Hollywood Drive, and I'm a parent of 3 kids, 1 graduate, and I'm also the founder of RISE. And I know you met Amy, so I'm glad that you had a chance to meet her. And I just wanted to thank you for being more explicit about all the work that's happening now around race and culture and gender and difference, and to just applaud and say how much that particularly many parents in the community are really valuing making that work really transparent. I'm also currently, for my own institution, doing a kind of a lit review of the work that institutions need to do to become more multicultural. And one of the things that I'm finding is that you have to do that work not just around curriculum, but around hiring, around protocols, around resources, around human resources. And the fact that you're trying to think about that at every level is incredibly valuable and powerful. So I just want to sort of support you in thinking about that in that way, and just to say how much we in RISE really value that you're thinking about that. And I wanted to make kind of 3 points. I think one is I just wanted to underscore the importance of professional development, because we know, as you said, that teachers, and I work with teachers myself as a teacher educator, there's so much variation in terms of people's experience and expertise working with race, and the need for really deep professional development to do that really well. And you made the point, I think, that it might be nice for teachers to have opportunities and make their own choices in terms of professional development could be really valuable. So I want to kind of just highlight that, and I'm so excited that you're thinking about that. I think the other pieces that we didn't hear very much that I think parents are very interested in is having the opportunity to hear about the protocols that schools have to put in place when there are challenges around race, or when something is found, swastikas, flyers in the woods, so that parents and the community members know explicitly what the school is doing to handle these kinds of things. And I know that's starting to be the case, but I think the more that can happen, the better off the parents and the members of the community will feel when they hear that there are steps that the school has, that you sort of put a protocol into action when something happens. I think that will be really valuable. And in RISE, we'd be happy to help you think about that. We've been looking into those kinds of things and doing some research around that as well. And I think the last point that I wanted to make and suggestion is that if there's any way to share with the community in a more broad way how the district is trying to take some leadership around race and class and gender, I think it would be helpful. You mentioned maybe putting the PowerPoints up on the website. We've actually been kind of co-sponsoring that strategic plan with RISE, the macro and micro goals. And so the more that I think the community can hear how you're thinking about this in an explicit and transparent way, I think people will be really reassured, because as we know, there's a really charged climate right now around race and class. And the more that people know how communities are trying to be proactive in this work, I think we'll all feel kind of reassured that this is happening at every level. So thank you so much for your work.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you so much for your work with Hastings RISE. And I did want to just say about the protocols that you mentioned. I know that is in the Race Matters the PowerPoint. Right. And it definitely came on our radar last year, because we did see different messaging going out, and I think it's an excellent point. We do need to have a central place that this is all worked through. Right. And the idea of communicating is, I'm just thinking, Tony could write one of his letters to communicate to our community.
Yeah, and I know that's part of the Race Matters have come up with some suggestions of schools that already have those kinds of protocols in place, where they just, something happens and they kind of have a set of routines that they go through when they address these kinds of things. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah. Any more public comment?
So I'm Jennifer Cunningham, 43 Warren Street. So I just want to say we've had some great discussions, particularly about the special ed and the diversity piece, which I appreciate, and it's great to see kind of some substantive discussions and more important progress. And I think this is a small piece, but I think it actually ties into both of the issues that we've talked about tonight, and that's to look at our disciplinary practices for students with disabilities and students of color. And because we talk about biases, and I'll state my prior bias, which came from profound ignorance. I, as a parent, as someone who was never disciplined as a child, or I mean, of significance within the school district, never had a suspension, things like that, and having children who had never been that. My thought when I heard about out of school suspensions, in-school suspensions, was one of other. And not really understanding the biases that play a role in what leads to that, the missed opportunities. As I've gone through this process and learning about students with disabilities, I've learned a lot about how impactful it is. And actually, SEPTA, we put together a program a few years ago now because of a parent whose child was repeatedly suspended, a student with a disability, and it brought forward, I think, an important question for me, and I learned a lot through that process. We put together a parent program, and it was, I have to say, really disappointing in that it was like browbeating to get anyone to come to attend. We had to kind of really, hey, someone from PTSA really should be here. Someone from the school really should be here. I think we had like one guidance counselor. Admittedly, it was at night. There was no one from the community. When you think about a suspension and disciplinary practice, especially when you're talking about inequity and how that's implemented, it's hugely impactful. And I think it's something that we think as a community we really value, or we respect and try to address inequity. I think that's something that has been completely overlooked in this community. And again, I know it's a small portion We have a relatively small number of students that are disciplined in terms of out-of-school suspensions. But when you look at the numbers, and actually there's some fantastic information online, it's mandated that it's published, and I put together all this information. It went to Board of Ed years ago, it went to Diesel, and it really kind of went nowhere. And this is off the top of my head, I wasn't even planning to say this tonight. Our students with disabilities are suspended at a rate of 13 times that of our students without disabilities. And that's compared to the general, across the nation, where it's a 2 to 3 times differential. So we are dramatically out of the box in terms of how we're disciplining our students with disabilities. I don't know the specifics in terms of students of color, but I know students with disability of color are even more so out of proportion. 75% of Black students with IEPs received out-of-school suspension in 1 year. That was a couple years ago. I was anxious to see the numbers come out. It's now 100%. So when we talk about disciplinary actions, and I don't think this is a standalone, I think it's all part of our own inherent biases as individuals, what we value, what comes to our attention. We think this isn't something that is other. I think we need to think that as part of it. I think it's a symptom of a problem that many of us don't want to talk about, don't understand, don't acknowledge the depth of it. And for those, granted few students that it affects, it is tremendously impactful. We know there's a school to prison pipeline. We know in terms of self-esteem. We know in terms of how teachers view you as other. We know as how parents view other parents of students who have been disciplined as other. I think when we make that part of our conversation about how we're going to address inequities, I think we need to make that part of it. And there's some really great resources that we can tap into. ACLU has a lot of programs. We reached out to Student Advocacy, who helped put us this program. The two of them actually co-sponsored that with us and presented, I think, a really great opportunity. Like one, looking at what does a school suspension really do in terms of impacting behavior? The answer is basically nothing. But also, like, what underlies the driving factor in this inequity? So I just want to put that out there, that as we're talking about that, I think that's a good marker of a symptom of an underlying problem that we need to address going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
If I may just follow up to your point for a moment, we did have a conversation around, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go
Am I allowed
ahead.
to talk?
Yes,
Sorry.
You may
we did
not
have a conversation around, around this notion of suspension as it relates to our children with IEPs as part of our code of conduct. And there is language in there in terms of looping our CSE chair people into those discussions. And so a reminder did go out to the building leadership team from me about that needing to be part of the process. The data that you shared stood out to me as I was going through the interview process to be your superintendent. And while the numbers are small, the rates are significant. But it's a complex thing, right? It's not just, as you touched on, there are biases and beliefs, also past practice, not trying to undermine anyone's authority as a leader within their space, and trying to figure out how all those things go together. And so it is something we, via email, touched upon to kind of put on the table, just so you know.
Hi, my name is Ann Cunningham. I live at 6 Nichols Drive. I have 2 kids, an 8th grader and a 5th grader. And I'm actually here today to, first of all, thank you for adopting the recommendations from Dr. Katzman in the audit report. But also, I want to remind you, my kids have never sought special education services. They've never asked for them. I want you to know that there is a broad community support for these changes. They need to happen. This is an education issue, not a special education issue. And I'm really just here to remind you that that there are many people out there that feel the same way I do. I'm speaking today in a personal capacity. I also am the co-president of the PTSA, and I just want to let you know that you We'll also be hearing from the PTSA once we have an opportunity to meet and talk. We are a new board, and we haven't had an opportunity to meet yet, but I know there's so much support for these changes that are happening, and everybody is incredibly excited. So you will be hearing from us again in the future, and we hope that we can help in any way possible.
I appreciate that you shared that, and I do want to just follow up on one point, because I have been trying to connect.
Okay.
And one of the things that I would like to try to implement this year is a forum focus group, I don't know what you want to call it, that is made up of executive board members from SEPTA and PTSA, so we're all in the room at the same time.
That's
having
fantastic.
Conversations around different issues. Some may be curricular and instruction in nature, but I do think, clearly you heard me say that somewhere else, that this is an education, and clearly you're copying my work. No,
Yes, I was.
No, it is an education issue that we're unpacking and trying to figure out. And so to have your insights as a collective, not just as independent, organizations, is something that I'm hoping we can do this year. So
It will definitely be on the forefront for the PTSA.
So we'll follow up.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you in the
Okay.
future to the PTSA. Are there any more public comments? Okay, we're almost done. I just, Board of Ed comments, I just wanted to ask the board, I had circulated a draft letter to everybody with the idea that if we did if we adopted the recommendations in the audit, it's an e-blast to the community. So I just wanted to, I sent it in advance, I wrote it because I would like it to come from the whole board.
I actually think that it should come from the superintendent, because we as a board accept those things, but it is his recommendation along with his director of special education to really make all of that stuff happen, and I really think he should be the leading voice on letting the community know. I mean, we played a role in the sense that we approved it, but this is really the source of the acceptance, and I would really like to come and have him be the lead voice on it.
The only reason I like this piece, I'll tell you where I see the two differences. The settlement agreement says the board adopts the recommendations. So that's why I see it as a board action. And then I see you as like the implementation person, like filling in the interstices of what we'll be doing. So that's why I saw it as appropriate from the board.
See, but my sense is that the interstices is the really important stuff. And our acceptance of it is, sort of programmatic in some ways. I mean, particularly since we all believe that this is what we should be doing, I don't think it's really startling or anything that shouldn't be startling to anybody that we actually approved and are going along with the recommendations of the superintendent on it. So I just really feel very strongly that we need to let the leader of the district be the superintendent and not get out in front of him on this one. I think he has much more to say on it than we do. I mean, it's happy to say that the board approved what I was recommending last night, but that I think it should be his voice as the lead on it.
You know what? I'm mixed, only because I do think the board. I think the board still is mending its relationship with the special education community. So that's why I do like the idea of something either to get together is fine with me, but I think the board's presence, because there has been a difficult history, again, not judging, not anything, but I think the community needs to hear from the board as well. I mean, comments, thoughts?
Well, I think I hadn't thought about what I would have said, but I like what you had written, but I do think, and it's something that we all have to find our way with, I think, as a board and with the new superintendent. I do think there's something to be said for many things actually coming right from Tony. I mean, it will say that the board supported it or unanimously supported it, however we want to put it. I think it's pretty clear that the board is in support of it. I appreciate what you're saying about trying to mend some things from the past in terms of the board with special ed, but I'm not sure where I land.
I will also say this, I think, and again, this is not to say one way is right or one way is wrong. I think in the past the board was not, did not e-blast or was not, so directly communicative with the district. And again, there's just different models, different styles. I get the sense from our community that they would like, to hear more from the board, and I have a comfort level with that voice. So it's not looking to get out ahead or anything, it's to show, we're a partnership. And that's why, again, this was our domains by the settlement agreement. When it comes to the how, like the way we wouldn't do the presentation that was done a month ago, that was Laura and Tony. So that's why I would say I'd rather not just be a line in passing. Again, I want to work towards really healing this, and I think we're on a great path. And I do like the board having a direct voice with the community when it's appropriate. And there aren't a ton of those opportunities.
I kind of hear what you're both saying, but I do feel that the superintendent is, to use a business term, the CEO of the district, and the recommendations that we approved were sort of put together, by Tony in conjunction with Laura, and that our
Laura Katzman's recommendations are what we approved.
Right, but you're talking about how they manifest themselves here specifically.
His recommendations are accept, with Laura Sullivan's to accept Laura Katzen's recommendation.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes,
Too many
thank you.
Lauras.
Too many Lauras. I'm just sensitive to Tony being a new superintendent and sort of establishing that he is really the, sort of the driving force, the top of the food chain. He made a recommendation to us, and we're accepting his recommendation, but he's really the one that's kind of, I feel like, I don't know. Tony, how do you feel?
I mean, I have.
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, you
and
can
I just
totally
did.
put me on the
I'm
spot.
sorry.
Totally fine.
Yeah, she did that.
You totally
And then
did
I
that.
threw you under the
It's
bus.
okay. Go ahead. Just back it up before I'm done. I do think that there are there are ways. I have worked in 3 other districts before I was here, and in terms of thinking about communication patterns, I think I've seen, for the most part, and so this is just more of a reflection, not my opinion per se, I have seen, for the most part, any communication around anything that's instructional in nature, that's educationally related, does typically come from the superintendent. It might be reflective of a board decision, a belief, a position, whatever the case may be. But ultimately, the purpose being to communicate a unified sort of position around something. So I think that's something to be mindful of. I also am thinking about the purpose of that communication piece, right around the adoption of the special ed, the adoption of the recommendations in the special ed audit. Part of sharing that information is also about re-scripting the narrative on some level that is out there, and that a part of that needs to be done in linking it back to general education. Like this is as Anne said, this is an education issue. This is not a special education issue. And so when you unpack those recommendations and you really drill down, we're talking about our general practices, about literacy instruction, about the way we view learning, the way that we link, kids who are getting tiered intervention versus a kid who's got an IEP, and I think ultimately that falls under education, which I think is what I'm responsible for. But that being said, I understand that there is a value in the board having a voice, and so I understand that too. I'm comfortable framing this information and communicating to the community that we have as a team unpacked this and considered it from multiple perspectives, and thus are making these recommendations. And I think that it would continue to mend or heal the needs that are there. So you can go ahead.
I was just going to say, and listening to you say your comments just now, feed this thought process even more. The more that you're out in front of the community, particularly as you're starting out, you're developing your currency with our constituents every day. And I think that under your leadership, Lisa, the community knows you. They know you're engaged. You're a longtime member of this community. You have that currency. I think these are opportunities that aren't going to present themselves every day. But actually, I think that this is a substantive, meaningful communication that a group of, 10% of this community is going to be responsive to. And just in this particular instance, as opposed to an overarching philosophy, in this particular instance, having Tony out in front of it, I think it's good as he grows here. It's my thought.
No, I mean, that's a good point, and I'm heartened by what you say, that if the community does see we're engaged, I don't have a read on it, so it's hard to tell. But if the community does get that, then I'm okay with it. I mean, I'm.
Bless you.
If that's a big part of my purpose was to connect. But if you think that that's happening already.
I do. I think so. I mean, in my short time here, but I'll just share two other things that we want to be mindful of. Is I think the perception has been that special education has been handled as its own entity by my predecessors, and that's part of the issue. And so if the message can come under one voice, and again I say mine because I'm the one that's going to write the email, but it's not really, I'm not reflecting my own thing. It's not like I'm doing things in a vacuum. I think it addresses that issue indirectly as well. Of this, we have been, and someone last time we were here used the phrase "coming out of the shadows," which I was like, that's pretty significant that people are feeling that way, and so I do feel comfortable framing that for us as a community. And the other thing I think is important that I think under certain things, especially as they're educationally related, one communication communicates unity and effectiveness. I'm also thinking about how many emails people do people want to get. And I'm being mindful of that, by the way. Trying to limit that to like one a week. But also because I'm a very huge proponent of almost oversaturating the community with information, because then there can't be a question of transparency, of looking to engage. I don't know many other superintendents that would unpack a hiring process for what we did when we went through the process for hiring Jesse. And I put that out there to our community because I want people to know that
Questions that come up should be addressed to you.
Well, that's the other piece. Well, and it's like you read my mind.
Sorry.
No, you're
sorry to front run your
Yoda.
No.
I like it. No, but
So we'll have Tony you'll do it.
I'm
There's actually another paragraph on it that talks about unifying gen ed and special ed.
and I
We'll
love
send it
that
to
piece.
you.
And Laura and I also started talking today during our retreat about communication. My next communication being a little bit of a spotlight of what's happening in each school, but also dovetailing special ed as a part of that, because we had a conversation about potentially sending out a separate letter, right? There was a whole conversation at Hillside, around a class at Hillside, about sending out a letter communicating to a group of parents that your child is in a class where other students might be mainstreamed. And so we unpacked that today as a team, because that is not a Hillside thing. It's not a Laura thing. It's not an Amy thing. Philosophically, it's a district. It's a district thing, philosophically speaking. And so we kind of discussed the possibility of that communication coming from me, because we don't want it to just target a specific group, because it's not just about a specific group. It kind of goes back to that whole notion of inclusivity and what we're looking to do. And so we talked about how do we incorporate some of that information into a general communication to our families, so that they all see it as a them thing, an us thing, whatever. So these conversations have been unfolding for days to figure out how we share this information. So I'm happy to draft it. I think it does make sense for it to come from me, and to reflect that this is a group decision that we worked on together. So.
No, that's fine. That was a good discussion.
If I could just add one comment. So I'm totally on board. And one thing, though, I did respond, I think, just to Lisa. And one of the things that I think in terms of changing perception about special education is really trying to get out to the community that when special education students are supported, all children learn at higher levels, achieve more.
Right.
And I feel like maybe there's a plan to do it or not, but wherever we can, I think we need to continually explicitly say that, and not just once, but sort of repeatedly. Not to pound people over the head with it, but the perception out there really is that special ed brings general ed kids down. Studies have shown that's not true.
No, right.
As teachers, as educators, as parents, many of us see that that's not true. But if that's some way could be included, I think, especially coming from somebody like you, it would carry more weight.
And that is very much content within a draft that we were working on today, as you may be aware of, because it is important, and it's doing it in a way that's mindful of not segregating a group, not spotlighting a group to segregate them, but to speak to the fact that it's all of, like, this is something we're all doing together,
right?
And so that's incredibly important as well. So my hope is to get something drafted by tomorrow night, but we'll see. Definitely by Wednesday, I promise. So there is the item, and I know we're very close to adjournment, but we did not talk about something at kindergarten, and that I would like to share with you.
Yeah.
I don't know where it fits in here, but it's not
Here.
on the, here it is.
It sounds like new business.
In new business, which I thought of, but then I didn't want to interrupt the conversation about the code of conduct. As you know, we are, and the community may or may not know, we are very close to having approached a number of students registered for kindergarten, incoming kindergarten, that would warrant adding a class at Hillside for kindergarten. So the number, and this was presented by Dr. Montesano before me at a PTSA meeting. He talked about the number 111 for grades K1 and 2, and then 116 for third and fourth as being the sort of magic number to split a grade. So in thinking about this, right now we have 109 officially registered for kindergarten, and we have 2 other kids out there who have packets or have communicated with our district about possibly registering their kids. I think in light of that, I would just like to present to you for your consideration now, because school starts on Tuesday, that we consider adding a class at Hillside in kindergarten. I ask that for a few reasons. One is I do think strongly, philosophically speaking, as an educator, we can look at kindergarten very differently than we look at any other group of students. And so in terms of past practice and that number 111, and possibly veering off course with this particular recommendation, I feel confident that I can speak to why kindergarten is different than any other grade level. It's different because it's a group of kids that are unfamiliar to us. It's different because we have kids coming from every direction in terms of what experiences they've had, what pre-K they've had or not had, and what literacy skills they've been exposed to and what not they've been exposed to, what social skills they've been exposed to and what they not, we don't have control over that, which is a great thing, but it's also a challenge that is presented unique to kindergarten. So I kind of wanted to start there in thinking about
Tony, may I add one more thing that
Yes.
makes kindergarten unique, and that is the Common Core Learning Standards have been, the kindergarten standards in particular have been criticized by early childhood specialists and even Governor Cuomo's task force, which was inclined to find in favor of them, but finding that they are, some will use the word developmentally inappropriate, others will just say exceedingly challenging or whatever, but the kindergarten standards are they're very tough.
Mm-hmm. And so that the expectations for what is to unfold in kindergarten, which is almost like, it's almost like second grade. But
you have to read with purpose and understanding emergent texts.
Envision, this is probably not going to be a great analogy, but you're trying to field a team, and you're doing it without having one practice or even one tryout. You're just kind of like, here you go, and get out there and play the game. And it's hard to do that work. So that's to your point about the expectations of kindergarten, not knowing what our starting point is, but having an expectation for what our end point is, which is very different than any other grade level. The other piece is we are also looking at a group here, particularly as they are coming in, that we do a screening of all our kids as they come in. We're looking at, for the first time, having 2 ICT classes in kindergarten, which means we have a higher number of classified kids that require that type of support than we have in the past. We also have children who have indicated through our screening process that their readiness levels speak to a need for support. And how that will manifest itself in the school year, we're not sure. It could mean a push-in support of another specialist. It can mean pull-out support. It will depend on the child and their need. OT, PT, speech, whatever. So looking at the particulars of this group as well. And again, so I'm just trying to reiterate how what I'm sharing with you is very unique to right now. I'm not asking you to change a practice moving forward, but specific to this group and looking at them. The other piece is we want to be mindful of, in addition to the academic work, the social emotional work that has to unfold in kindergarten as well. And we want to make sure that there's time for play, structured and unstructured. We want to make sure that there's time for small group instruction and one-on-one instruction. Again, because you're trying to create that, I don't want to say you're leveling the playing field, but you kind of are leveling the playing field. Knowing that there's a difference between 22 kids or 23 kids versus 18 or 19 kids is a reality. The last thing I will share with you, we went back and we looked at the data for the last 5 years, and between September 1 and October, every kindergarten cohort has, well, except for one did not gain, but then on the opposite side, one gained 5 kids. Every other group has gained a kid. And so we're looking at being around that number anyway, anticipating that we're going to have that child at some point in the next 6 weeks at the latest. So I would like you to consider adding a 6th class in kindergarten at Hillside for this school year.
Is that something we need to vote on, or?
No, well, you had it funded in the budget as a contingency, so you have the money, so I think it's just going to form a new piece on that number.
That's my suggestion.
Okay.
I'm not asking you.
I think it sounds like a great suggestion. I think you make a very compelling case, and it is. I think we've had discussions that if we can address things at the kindergarten level, it's just going to be better as they cycle through school.
Yeah, if you look at the research, if you can intervene at the youngest, it's like early intervention. And again, not to say, I'm not implying that every child needs some sort of intervention coming into kindergarten, not at all. But if we can target those needs, we're looking at an upswing in other ways, that will lessen needs. So, and I'd like to do that so that we can communicate to our kindergarten families that we'll need a couple of days to figure this out and get them their class placement at the end of the week, while everyone else can get their class placement tomorrow.
And I would just like to reiterate to the community, as Maureen just said, it is in the budget, and there's availability that's been created in terms of
other things,
other money not being used both in the middle school and in the high school,
and in central office,
that had been budgeted. So there's a need in terms of the size of the class, the potential size of the class if historical precedent holds, and the financial wherewithal both being budgeted and fortunately becoming available in the middle school and high school not used. I'm in favor of it per all of the reasons that you said. So.
And the classroom space available.
And the classroom.
And
that's
big too.
They already had, they had a candidate, so it's not like they have to work out tomorrow, like they have an interview for other positions, so. not like they have to go find the teacher tomorrow.
I would just like to say that I think it's really being proactive rather than reactive, and it's visionary, and I'm appreciative for it, and I think it's great.
I commend our leadership team at the elementary level because they have been having this, Amy and John both. In addition to Laura, we've been talking about this for a couple of weeks, and I've been kind of keeping it at bay as I flesh out my thinking. But I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of put that out there with all of you and know that it will be heard, and that we can unpack it in a really child-centered way. Because if I left with nothing else from our administrative retreat today was, we work with a group of educators, from our administrators to our teachers to our teacher aides, who really focus on putting kids at the center of their decisions. And I appreciate that we also work with a board that does that. So thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, can I get a motion?
Comment, is Thursday the first day for teachers?
Thursday is the first day for teachers.
So will you be there, Lisa?
I will be there.
You're all welcome to come. We're going to have food in the morning, and our steel drum group is going to perform.
They're great.
And then there's going to be a barbecue at 11:30. So you come on down for that. I'm not sure really what we're serving. I'm not barbecuing. I did have to schedule my. I am going to. I was supposed to have a physical. I was like, no, I'm having a barbecue, so that'll have another day. But yeah, so please join us on Thursday if you're around anytime in the morning, 8 to 9-ish. It'll be a little more open-ended. And then again, 11:30 was barbecuing. So
Starting in high school.
we're starting in the auditorium, yes. That's where Mr. Jernigan is the guy doing the steel drums, no?
But he's a great barbecue.
Oh.
Yes, he's multi-talented.
I can tell you that
He is.
I'm not doing the barbecuing,
Okay,
that's all you tell.
Wait, before we leave, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, a motion.
And a do we have a motion?
I like the motion.
And a second? All in favor?